My name is Diana Morgan Whitfield, and for 46 years I have been a woman who learned to speak by staying silent. Tonight, under the vineyard lights of Napa Valley, that silence is about to shatter like crystal against marble, and my sister Vivienne will discover that the woman she introduced as someone who works in local government paperwork has been a federal judge for 11 years. The engagement party glitters around me now, all white roses and $1,000 champagne flutes, the kind of celebration where every smile costs something and every laugh has been rehearsed. September air moves through the vineyard, heavy with the scent of late harvest grapes and expensive perfume. Sunset Hills Estate spreads across 50 acres of California wine country, each vine meticulously tended, each guest meticulously selected. 300 people who matter, Vivienne said when she sent the invitation. People who understand what it means to be connected to real power. I stand near the edge of the terrace in a navy dress that cost $200 instead of $2,000, watching my younger sister hold court in silver silk that catches every flicker of candlelight. She moves through the crowd like light through water, effortless and refracting, 40 years old, and still convinced the world exists to witness her radiance. Her fiancé Marcus Chen circles nearby, 42 and tech wealthy, the kind of man who measures success in venture capital rounds and disruption metrics. His father stands with a group of judges near the bar, silver-haired and calm, with the particular stillness that comes from 3 decades on the federal bench. The Honorable Thomas Chen, senior judge, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The man I saved 16 years ago when I was 30 years old, and still believed that good work mattered more than good publicity. Vivienne approaches now, champagne in hand, her smile bright enough to blind anyone who looks too long. She leans close, her breath sweet with expensive wine and carefully curated confidence. Don't embarrass me tonight. His father is a federal appeals judge. We need to make good impressions. The words settle like familiar weight, the kind I have carried since childhood, when being good meant being invisible and being impressive meant being quiet. I nod once, fingers tightening around my own glass until the stem nearly cracks. Something in my chest shifts, a tectonic movement I have felt building for months, for years, for decades. After tonight, I think after tonight, silence will never protect them again. The thought tastes like freedom. Vivienne touches my arm, her fingers cold despite the warm evening. You look nice. Simple. That's good. We don't want to overshadow the important guests. She glances toward Judge Chen and his wife, toward the cluster of tech executives and venture capitalists who orbit Marcus like planets around a sun. These are serious people, Diana. They're used to a certain level of sophistication. I sip my wine and say nothing. I have spent a lifetime perfecting this particular silence, the kind that looks like agreement but feels like armor. Vivienne mistakes my quiet for compliance, the way she always has, the way everyone always has. She squeezes my hand once, a gesture that might look affectionate from a distance, but carries the weight of instruction up close. Just smile and be supportive, that's all I need from you. She drifts away, back toward her spotlight, back toward the center of attention that has always felt like her natural habitat. I watch her go and remember the first time I understood that in our family, there would only ever be room for one star, and I had been cast as the foundation everyone would stand on and never thank. San Francisco, 1990. I was 12 years old, standing in the kitchen of our Pacific Heights home with a trophy in my hands, and my mother's polite smile etched into memory like acid into glass. The academic decathlon had taken 6 months of preparation, weekends spent with flashcards and practice questions, while Vivienne played dress-up in the next room. I brought home first place in the state, a medal heavy around my neck and pride bright in my chest like a small sun. My father examined the trophy with the same attention he gave quarterly earnings reports, measured and abstract. That's wonderful, Diana. You've always been good with details. He set it on the refrigerator door, held by a magnet shaped like the Golden Gate Bridge. The trophy stayed there for 1 week before my mother moved it to make room for Vivienne's headshot from a commercial audition. 6 years old and already photogenic, my sister had been cast in a local advertisement for a department store. The photos filled the hallway leading to the bedrooms, 8 frames of Vivienne in different poses, each one capturing some essential brightness that cameras loved and people noticed. My academic trophy went into a box in the garage, stored between Christmas decorations and old tax returns, preserved but not displayed, acknowledged but not celebrated. My mother found me looking at the empty refrigerator space that night. "Every family needs both," she said, her voice gentle with the particular cruelty of unexamined conviction. "The glamorous and the grounded. Vivienne needs encouragement because the world will be harder on beautiful things. You'll be fine, darling. You're built for the long game." I asked her what game we were playing. She smiled and kissed my forehead and never answered. The pattern established itself with the quiet inevitability of water finding downhill paths. I won debate competitions and science fairs, brought home straight A's and scholarship offers, accumulated achievements the way other children collected stamps or coins. Each one earned me a dinner out, maybe, or a brief mention at family gatherings before the conversation turned to Vivienne's latest audition, or modeling opportunity, or social triumph. My success became the preamble to her celebration, the opening act no one remembered once the main show began. Stanford accepted me with a full scholarship when I was 18. The letter arrived on the same day as Vivienne's high school graduation, which meant the family focus had already been allocated, the attention budget already spent. We celebrated my acceptance at Olive Garden, 4 of us around a table near the kitchen. The meal finished in 45 minutes, including dessert. Vivienne's graduation party that evening filled our house with 200 people, catered food and a string quartet. My father's partners from the investment bank, and my mother's friends from the Arts Foundation. I stood in a corner watching my sister glow in the center of the room and understood something fundamental about visibility and value, about being seen and being celebrated, about the difference between those things and the distance between them. My mother found me at the party's end, when the guests had gone and the caterers were packing up wine glasses and dessert plates. "We're very proud of you, Diana." She touched my shoulder the way people touch furniture they're fond of, familiar but not intimate. "But you understand we need to focus on Vivienne right now. She's at such a delicate age." I wanted to ask what age I was at, whether 18 counted as delicate, whether achievement counted as fragile, whether being overlooked felt any less painful than being scrutinized. But I said nothing because I had already learned that questions without good answers are better left unasked. I went to Stanford in the fall and called home every Sunday and listened to stories about Vivienne's first semester at design school, about the boys who noticed her, and the professors who praised her aesthetic vision, and the future that seemed to open before her, like flowers in time-lapse photography. My own future built itself more slowly, in library carols and study groups, in the quiet accumulation of legal knowledge and the careful construction of professional competence. Law school taught me that precision matters, that details determine outcomes, that the difference between justice and injustice often lives in a single misplaced comma or overlooked precedent. I made law review my second year, clerked for a Ninth Circuit judge my third, learned to write briefs that were clear and compelling and completely devoid of anything resembling personal flair. The work suited me. The law demanded exactitude without requiring charisma, respected competence without needing charm. I could be excellent without being visible, effective without being noticed. I graduated near the top of my class and took a position as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Northern District of California, prosecuting cases that mattered and earning a salary that my parents described to their friends as steady. My mother would mention me at dinner parties when the conversation turned to careers and children. "Diana's doing some legal work up north, very stable." Then she would brighten, the way people do when moving from obligation to enthusiasm. "And Vivienne just opened her first boutique in the marina. You should see her eye for design. Absolutely extraordinary." The boutique failed within 2 years. Vivienne married a gallery owner who appreciated her aesthetic more than her business acumen, a man named Thomas, who wore black turtlenecks and spoke about art with the passionate intensity of someone who had inherited money and mistaken it for taste. The marriage lasted 18 months before Vivienne discovered he appreciated other women's aesthetics too, often and enthusiastically, and in their shared bed when he thought she was working late. She came home to our parents' house carrying 2 suitcases and a wounded expression that made my mother weep with sympathy. Diana flew down from San Francisco for the weekend, held her sister while she cried, listened to stories about betrayal and heartbreak and the particular pain of being beautiful enough to attract love, but not substantial enough to keep it. I stayed 3 days and returned to work on Monday morning to a case that involved mortgage fraud and required my attention more than my sister's broken marriage required my presence. The second marriage came 6 years later. A real estate developer named Richard, who bought Vivienne a condo in Russian Hill and treated her like an acquisition that increased in value simply by being displayed. That one lasted 3 years before Richard decided to develop other properties, other investments, other opportunities that didn't include a wife who spent more than she earned and contributed more to his aesthetic than his bottom line. Vivienne kept the condo in the divorce settlement. My mother told me this over lunch in 2018, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and pride. At least she got something substantial this time. Richard was generous in the end. She didn't mention that I had helped Vivienne hire the divorce attorney, had reviewed the settlement documents, had advised her sister on negotiating tactics and asset protection. My contribution became invisible in the retelling, absorbed into the narrative of Vivienne's resilience and Richard's generosity, erased from the story the way my achievements had always been erased, footnoted at best and forgotten at worst. But I wasn't forgotten by everyone. The Holloway case arrived on my desk in spring 2008, a thick file that smelled of old paper and newer accusations. Judge Thomas Chen of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals stood accused of accepting favors from law firms that appeared before him, a charge that carried the particular toxicity of judicial corruption allegations. If proven, it would destroy his career, taint his rulings, unravel cases that stretched back decades. The evidence looked damning at first review, a pattern of decisions that seemed to favor certain firms, a timeline that suggested influence and quid pro quo. I was 30 years old and 5 years into my career as a federal prosecutor, still young enough to believe that truth mattered more than perception and evidence mattered more than politics. I took the assignment because someone had to, because the case needed reviewing, because finding truth felt like the point of every oath I had ever taken. 3 months of investigation taught me that finding truth and being celebrated for it are entirely different things. I traced financial records and examined calendars, interviewed witnesses and cross-referenced testimony, built spreadsheets that mapped relationships and timelines with the precision of cartography. What emerged was not corruption, but coincidence, not quid pro quo, but the inevitable overlap that occurs when intelligent people work in the same field for decades. The supposed favors were legitimate recusals, properly documented and entirely appropriate. The pattern of favorable decisions reflected judicial philosophy, not judicial compromise. The exculpatory evidence lived in a 15-year-old case file that had been misfiled and forgotten, buried in boxes that no one had examined, because everyone assumed the recent allegations were new patterns rather than old misunderstandings. I found it on a Friday evening in June, alone in a storage room that smelled of dust and neglect, reading pages that proved Judge Chen had recused himself from the exact cases the accusers claimed showed favoritism. The document changed everything. It cleared a man's name and preserved a career, and demonstrated that sometimes justice requires nothing more than careful attention and willingness to look where no one else bothered to search. I presented my findings to the independent review panel on Monday morning, watched them examine the evidence with expressions that shifted from skepticism to surprise to relief. The case was dismissed by end of week. Judge Thomas Chen's reputation was restored, his legacy protected, his integrity confirmed. My name appeared nowhere in the public report. I removed it myself, attributed the findings to the review team as a whole, erased my individual contribution, because I had learned early that being seen meant being resented, and being effective meant being invisible. The panel published their conclusions with grateful anonymity. The legal community moved on to other scandals and newer controversies. Judge Chen sent me a private letter on official stationery, 3 paragraphs of gratitude that I read once and filed away and have never forgotten. "You gave me back my legacy," he wrote in careful script. "I won't forget who did this or what it cost you to do it quietly. Good people remember. That's something worth more than recognition." I believed him because I needed to believe that quiet competence would be rewarded eventually, that doing good work without demanding credit would accumulate into something valuable, that being invisible didn't mean being worthless. I was 30 years old and still convinced that virtue was its own reward, that integrity required no audience, that being right mattered more than being recognized. 5 years later, I learned exactly how much being right mattered when weighed against being forgotten. President Obama nominated me to the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California in January 2013. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing a case file about securities fraud, my desk cluttered with depositions and my mind occupied with questions about intent and materiality. The White House counsel's voice carried through the phone with the particular formality of power exercised carefully, asking if I would accept the nomination, explaining the process and timeline and expectations. I said yes because the work mattered and the position represented everything I had built toward for 15 years. I said yes because federal judges serve lifetime appointments and shape law for decades. I said yes because being asked to serve felt like vindication of every silent hour I had spent building competence instead of cultivating publicity. The Senate confirmation hearing took place in March. 8 hours of questioning from senators who wanted to understand my judicial philosophy and political ideology and personal history. I answered with precision and honesty, explained my approach to constitutional interpretation and statutory construction, detailed my record as a prosecutor, and my commitment to impartiality. The hearing felt like an examination in the purest sense, a test of knowledge and character and fitness for responsibility. The Senate confirmed me 87-12, a comfortable margin that reflected bipartisan respect for my qualifications, if not universal enthusiasm for my philosophy. I was sworn in on March 22, 2013, my hand on a borrowed Bible, and my voice steady with an oath that promised to administer justice without respect to persons and to faithfully and impartially discharge all duties of the office. I sent my family an announcement by email that evening. Subject line: confirmed to federal bench. The message included a link to the Senate vote results and a photograph from the swearing-in ceremony. My mother replied 6 hours later, "That's lovely, dear. Can you attend Vivienne's gallery opening next week? She needs family support for this new exhibition." The gallery opening was in Los Angeles, a showing of Vivienne's interior design work presented as art installation, rooms constructed inside a warehouse to demonstrate her aesthetic vision. I flew down on Friday evening after finishing a sentencing hearing, stood in a crowd of people who praised my sister's eye for color and sense of space, while I wore my courtroom suit and smiled at appropriate moments. Someone asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, Vivienne appeared with champagne and explanation. "Diana works for the federal court system. Very important administrative work. She keeps everything running smoothly." I watched my sister describe my job with the casual confidence of someone who had never bothered to read an email closely enough to understand its content. The crowd nodded politely and turned their attention back to the installations, to the careful arrangement of furniture and lighting that Vivienne had curated with the same attention she gave to her own image. I left early, caught a late flight back to San Francisco, spent Sunday morning reviewing case files in my chambers on the 17th floor of the federal building. The chambers were smaller than I had imagined and more quiet, with windows that looked out toward the bay and shelves that would eventually fill with law books and case reporters. My name appeared on a brass plate beside the door. The Honorable Diana Morgan Whitfield. I sat at my desk that first Sunday and felt something I had never quite experienced before, a sense of having arrived at a destination I had been traveling toward since childhood, without knowing the route or recognizing the landmarks. I was 35 years old and a federal judge and completely invisible to my own family. The irony tasted bitter and familiar. 11 years passed in the particular rhythm that judicial work creates, cases and hearings and written opinions that shape law incrementally and influence outcomes that matter to people I would never meet. I heard civil rights cases and constitutional challenges, corporate disputes and criminal appeals, questions about liability and standing and jurisdiction that required careful reasoning and clear writing. My rulings earned respect from attorneys who appeared before me and citations from judges who found my reasoning persuasive. In 2019, I issued an opinion in Chen versus Department of Justice that established new precedent for whistleblower protections, a case that involved retaliation claims and statutory interpretation, and questions about administrative procedure. The decision was unanimous among my colleagues on the panel, comprehensive in its analysis, and taught in law schools within 6 months as an example of clear constitutional reasoning. The case had nothing to do with Judge Thomas Chen, except for the coincidence of surname, but the legal community noticed nonetheless, commented privately about my consistent excellence and public invisibility. My family noticed nothing. Vivienne's Instagram account grew to 890,000 followers during those 11 years. Her feed, a curated collection of designer brunches and charity galas, and carefully staged photographs that presented her life as a sequence of elegant moments. She called herself a lifestyle curator, which seemed to mean arranging beautiful things in photogenic configurations and charging people to learn how to do the same. Her posts collected thousands of likes and hundreds of comments, strangers praising her aesthetic and asking where she bought her dishes or found her furniture, or discovered her particular shade of contentment. I had no social media presence. My life existed in court filings and legal opinions, in written words that shaped outcomes for litigants and established precedent for future cases. I owned a house in Presidio Heights that I had purchased 8 years earlier, a 3-bedroom Victorian that cost $1.8 million, and that I paid off in 2020 with income I had saved and invested carefully since my father's death. I owned 2 commercial properties in the Soma district that generated rental income and appreciated steadily in value. My investment portfolio held $4.7 million in diversified assets that I managed myself with the same attention I gave to case files and legal research. My total net worth approached $16.2 million. My family assumed I made $60,000 a year as a county clerk. The assumption was so absurd, I had stopped trying to correct it. Every attempt at clarification had been met with polite acknowledgement that slid immediately into subject changes, conversations that pivoted from my work to Vivienne's latest project, or my mother's newest philanthropic initiative, or the weather in San Francisco versus Los Angeles. After a while, I stopped trying. I sent updates by email that no one read closely, and made phone calls that no one remembered accurately, and visited during holidays with the understanding that my presence was noted but not particularly necessary. I built a life where my value didn't depend on their recognition. I found satisfaction in work that mattered, and friendships with colleagues who respected competence, and relationships with people who asked questions and listened to answers. I learned that being unseen by family meant being free from their judgment, that invisibility carried its own advantages, that silence could be chosen instead of imposed. But silence has limits. Silence can protect and isolate simultaneously. Silence can preserve peace while accumulating resentment. And sometimes silence breaks not because someone speaks, but because truth becomes too large to contain. The invitation arrived by email in July 2024. Subject line: "You're invited, Vivi and Marcus, a celebration of love." The message included photographs of my sister and her new fiancé, a man named Marcus Chen, who appeared in candid shots that looked professionally staged, both of them laughing in front of California vineyards and sunset backgrounds. The engagement party would be held September 14th at Sunset Hills Estate in Napa Valley. Black tie optional. Family table reserved for close relatives. Vivienne's personal note appeared at the bottom of the email, a postscript that carried instructions disguised as warm invitation. Diana, so glad you can make it. Please wear something appropriate. Marcus's family is very prominent. His father is a federal appeals judge. We need to make good impressions. Let me know if you need help with outfit selection. Love you, V. I read the email 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of assumption and instruction. The all-caps emphasis on federal appeals, Judge suggested Vivienne thought this information would impress me, that proximity to judicial power was something my life lacked, and her engagement would finally provide. The offer to help with outfit selection contained the implicit suggestion that my normal clothing was inadequate for occasions that mattered. The entire message treated me like a supporting character in Vivienne's story, someone whose role was to blend into the background and reflect light without generating it. I looked up Marcus Chen that evening, found his company profile and Forbes interviews, and the inevitable photographs of him with his father at legal events and law school graduations. The Honorable Thomas Chen, senior judge, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The man I had saved 16 years ago when I was a 30-year-old prosecutor, willing to work weekends in dusty storage rooms to find truth that everyone else had stopped looking for. The man who remembered me when my own family had forgotten I existed. I considered calling Vivienne to explain, to tell her who I was and what I did and how the judge she name-dropped for status was a colleague I had known for over a decade. I considered telling my mother that the federal bench she thought was impressively connected to Marcus's family was the same institution where I had served for 11 years. I considered correcting all the assumptions and misunderstandings that had accumulated like sediment over decades of my silence and their indifference. Instead, I called Judge Chen's chambers and left a message with his clerk. "This is Judge Whitfield from the Northern District. Please let Judge Chen know I'll be attending his son's engagement party in September. I'd appreciate if he didn't mention our connection before I arrive. I have some family dynamics to address." His clerk called back within an hour. "Judge Chen says he understands completely and looks forward to seeing you there. He asked me to tell you it's time some people learned who you really are." The message felt like permission and warning simultaneously, an acknowledgement that truth delayed is not truth denied, and that invisibility maintained by others' assumptions is not the same as invisibility chosen for protection. I spent the next 6 weeks preparing for the party the way I prepared for important hearings, thinking through possible scenarios and likely reactions and the questions I would answer with honesty when asked directly. August brought small humiliations that built toward September's reckoning. My mother called to discuss appropriate attire for the engagement party, suggested I might benefit from professional styling since Vivienne's events attracted a sophisticated crowd. "We can't have you looking like a public defender, darling. This is serious money we're talking about." I started to say that I was a public servant, not a public defender, that there was dignity in both but distinction between them, that my salary as a federal judge was $223,400 annually, and that serious money wasn't something I lacked. But the words died before reaching my lips, because I had learned that correction required an audience willing to hear it, and my mother had never been that audience. A week later, Vivienne called about table assignments, mentioned that she had placed me with family rather than mixed company, because I'm not really comfortable with Marcus's business crowd. "You'll be happier with Mom and the cousins. Less pressure to make conversation with venture capitalists and tech people who might not understand your work." The assumption that I couldn't hold my own in conversations about business and technology would have been funny if it weren't so perfectly calibrated to wound. I had spent 11 years adjudicating cases involving securities fraud and patent disputes, had written opinions analyzing complex business structures and innovative technology platforms, had questioned expert witnesses about algorithms and market manipulation until their testimony collapsed under scrutiny. But Vivienne had decided I was more comfortable with family than with serious people, had relegated me to the background table, where my presence could be noted without being noticed. I accepted the table assignment without argument. Sometimes the best response to being underestimated is waiting for the moment when estimation becomes impossible. The final indignity arrived the day of the party when I checked in at the estate's registration desk. A young woman in black uniform scanned her tablet and handed me a name tag printed on heavy cardstock with calligraphy that looked expensive and permanent. The tag read, "Diana Whitfield, County Administration." The description was so perfectly wrong I almost laughed. 11 years as a federal judge, reduced to county administration, a lifetime appointment degraded to bureaucratic background noise, constitutional authority diminished to filing paperwork and managing schedules. I looked at the tag and thought about correcting it, about asking the coordinator to check her information, about insisting on accuracy in a way that would require explanation. Instead, I pinned the tag to my dress and walked into the party wearing my sister's misunderstanding like armor. Sometimes truth is more powerful when it arrives unexpected, when correction comes not from explanation, but from revelation, when being seen happens suddenly and completely, and without the buffer of gradual adjustment. The party had already gathered momentum by the time I arrived. 300 people spread across terraces and gardens that overlooked vineyard rows stretching toward distant hills. White roses climbed every column and cascaded from every arch, their scent mixing with champagne and catered food, and the particular smell of new money meeting old prestige. A string quartet played near the main terrace, music that sounded like elegance and cost like excellence. Gold letters spelling Talia and Elliot hung above the bar, backlit and gleaming. I accepted champagne from a passing waiter and found my assigned table near the edge of the seating area, close enough to the family to be included, but far enough from the main action to be ignorable. My mother sat with my father's cousins, people I saw once a year at holidays and remembered poorly. They greeted me with polite warmth and vaguer questions about my work and my life and my thoughts about Vivienne's engagement. I answered in generalities and watched the party orbit around my sister, like a solar system around its sun. Vivienne moved through the crowd in silver silk that caught candlelight and camera flashes. Marcus beside her in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly salary. They looked perfect together in the way that magazine couples look perfect, their beauty and wealth and mutual admiration performing for an audience that applauded on cue. Judge Thomas Chen stood near the bar with his wife and several other judges, their conversation carrying the particular cadence of people who had known each other for decades. I watched him from across the terrace and remembered the letter he had written 16 years ago, the gratitude offered privately because I had done good work quietly. He glanced in my direction once, our eyes meeting briefly, and I saw recognition there and something else, a kind of anticipation that suggested he knew what was coming and approved of the timing. The dinner began with toasts and continued with courses that arrived in careful succession, each plate arranged like art and tasting like money. Vivienne's voice carried over the sound system as she thanked everyone for celebrating this special moment, for supporting her journey, for witnessing the beginning of her new life with Marcus and his wonderful family. She gestured toward Judge Chen and his wife, her smile radiant with the particular pleasure of marrying up, of gaining status through association, of becoming adjacent to power. My mother leaned close during the salad course, her voice low but urgent. Isn't this wonderful? Vivienne's finally marrying into a family that matters. A federal appeals judge, can you imagine the connections? I sipped my wine and imagined many things, most of them involving my mother's expression when she learned those connections already existed and had been maintained for 16 years without her knowledge or participation. The thought carried a satisfaction I knew was petty, and allowed myself anyway, because sometimes pettiness is the only honest response to decades of being treated as peripheral. The sun set over the vineyard as dessert arrived, the sky turning colors that looked expensive even though nature provided them free. Candles flickered on every table and strings of lights illuminated the garden paths, and the whole scene looked like something from a wedding magazine or luxury catalog. Beautiful and curated, and completely hollow at its center. Vivienne found me as the formal dinner ended and dancing began, her cheeks flushed with champagne and attention. She sat in the empty chair beside me and took my hand with the kind of affection that comes easily when everything is going according to plan. Thank you for being here. I know these events aren't really your scene. The assumption that elegance wasn't my scene, that sophistication required her guidance, that I existed in some separate sphere of normalcy while she occupied the realm of exceptional, settled into my chest like stone. I squeezed her hand and smiled and said nothing, because there was nothing to say yet, because the moment for speaking would arrive soon enough, because silence had protected her from truth for so long, that breaking it required proper timing. She leaned closer, champagne sweet on her breath and urgency bright in her eyes. Just please don't embarrass me tonight. His father is a federal judge. Do you understand how important that is? These are serious people with serious connections, and we need to make the right impression. The words hit like an old familiar verdict, the same judgment I had heard in different forms my entire life. Don't stand out, don't claim space, don't embarrass the star by existing too loudly. I nodded once, my champagne glass stem bending slightly under the pressure of my grip, and promised myself that this would be the last time I made myself small for someone else's comfort. Movement across the terrace caught my attention. Judge Thomas Chen walking toward our table with Marcus beside him, both men carrying the confident ease of people accustomed to respect and attention. Vivienne straightened immediately, her party smile brightening to something more strategic, more calculated to charm. She stood to greet them, and I stood as well, years of courtroom protocol making the gesture automatic. Judge Chen's eyes met mine, and I saw the decision forming, saw him choose this moment for truth after 16 years of patient waiting. He extended his hand to me first, not to Vivienne, his voice carrying clearly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Good to see you again, Judge Whitfield." The sound of glass shattering cut through the music and conversation. Vivienne's champagne flute hit the marble terrace and broke into pieces that scattered like shrapnel, champagne pooling across white stone like spilled light. The nearby tables went quiet first, then the silence spread outward in ripples until even the string quartet noticed and paused mid-phrase. I shook Judge Chen's hand and held his gaze and spoke the words that would change everything that came after. "It's good to see you too, Your Honor." Someone near us whispered the word judge like a question. Judge Chen smiled slightly, the expression warm with old gratitude and new satisfaction. "Judge Diana Morgan Whitfield," he said clearly, his voice projecting with the authority of 3 decades on the bench. "United States District Court, Northern District of California. Appointed by President Obama. Confirmed by the Senate in March 2013. The whispers grew louder, sharper, faster. My mother's face went pale. Marcus stared at me with an expression that moved from confusion to understanding to something approaching anger. Vivienne stood frozen beside her broken glass, mascara starting to smudge at the corners of her eyes, her perfect party crumbling around her like the champagne flute at her feet. I kept my voice steady and professional, the same tone I used for courtroom proceedings and oral arguments. I've been a federal judge for 11 years. I saved Judge Chen's career in 2008 when I was an assistant U.S. attorney, the Holloway case. We've been colleagues ever since. Vivienne's voice came out small and trembling. "You could have told us." I met her eyes and spoke the truth I had been carrying for decades. "I sent you all my appointment announcement. You replied asking if I could bring wine to your birthday party. I've mentioned my work in dozens of conversations. You've never asked a single follow-up question. I didn't hide this from you. You chose not to see it." Judge Chen turned to Marcus, his expression gentle but firm. "Your future sister-in-law is the judge who found the evidence that cleared my name 16 years ago. She removed herself from public credit, did the work anonymously, asked for nothing in return. She's one of the finest legal minds in California, and her ruling in Chen versus Department of Justice, no relation to me, is taught in law schools across the country." The silence that followed felt absolute, a vacuum where sound should be but couldn't survive. 300 guests watching a family come apart in real time, watching assumptions shatter like crystal, watching a woman who had been invisible for 46 years suddenly become impossible to ignore. Marcus spoke quietly, his words cutting through the stillness. "You told me your sister was a clerk, a mid-level employee who filed paperwork." Vivienne's breath caught audibly. I thought, she never corrected me. "I didn't correct you because you never listened," I said, the words emerging with a clarity that felt like relief. "I've been trying to tell you who I am for 11 years. You've been too busy talking about yourself to hear me." My mother made a sound between a sob and a gasp. "We could have been so proud. Why didn't you make us understand?" "Because pride requires attention," I answered, looking directly at her. "You were proud of Vivienne's commercial when she was 6. You were proud of her boutique that failed and her marriages that ended and her Instagram followers who don't know her. You've never been proud of me because you've never bothered to know me. I didn't hide my achievements. You hid from them." The terrace stayed silent except for the distant sound of waves against shore and wind through grapevines, nature continuing despite human drama the way it always does. Judge Chen touched my arm gently, a gesture of support that felt paternal despite our professional relationship. There are moments when truth stands without defense. This is one of them. I excused myself quietly, walked away from the broken glass and broken assumptions, from my sister's tears and my mother's shock, from the party that had been designed to celebrate Vivienne's elevation and had become instead the setting for my revelation. The terrace doors led to a garden path that wound through roses and lavender toward the vineyard's edge, where the cultivated ground gave way to wild hills beyond. I stood there in the September darkness and felt the weight of 46 years of silence lift like morning fog burning off under sun. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't check, voices calling my name that I didn't answer, the party continuing behind me in some diminished form, while I breathed air that tasted like freedom and wine grapes, and the particular sweetness of truth finally spoken aloud. Being unseen had kept me safe for decades, had protected me from scrutiny and expectation, had allowed me to build a life of substance without the burden of family opinion. But being seen, I realize now, being truly seen and acknowledged and forced into visibility despite every instinct toward protection. This was the only way to be fully alive. The garden path led to a small gazebo overlooking the valley, vines stretching toward darkness in perfect rows that spoke of cultivation and care. I sat on a bench that still held the day's warmth and looked at the stars emerging above the hills and thought about everything that would change now that pretense had ended and truth had arrived without mercy or warning. Behind me, the party continued in whatever form it could take after shattering, but I didn't look back. I had spent a lifetime being the foundation everyone stood on and never thanked. Tonight, I had become visible not through revelation I controlled, but through truth someone else spoke first. The distinction mattered less than the outcome. My reflection in the gazebo's dark windows showed a woman I had never quite allowed myself to be before, whole and present, and undeniably seen. The image stayed with me as I walked back toward the estate, toward whatever came next, toward the family who would have to decide what to do with a sister they had never bothered to know, and a daughter they had never thought to celebrate. The music started again as I reached the terrace, strings and piano playing something meant to soothe and restore, to carry the party forward despite the fracture in its foundation. People watched me walk through their midst with expressions I couldn't read and didn't try to interpret. I had spent enough years reading other people's faces and adjusting my behavior accordingly. Tonight I would simply exist as myself and let them adjust however they could manage. Vivienne stood near the broken glass that staff had already swept away, her silver dress catching candlelight, and her expression carrying something I had never seen before: actual recognition. Not the polite acknowledgement she had always offered, but genuine seeing, the kind that comes when illusions break and reality becomes unavoidable. We looked at each other across 20 feet of marble terrace and 40 years of misunderstanding. Neither of us moved to close the distance. The space between us had always been there, invisible but real, maintained by her assumptions and my silence, and a family dynamic that required one daughter to shine while the other stayed hidden. But I wasn't hidden anymore. I was a federal judge standing in candlelight at my sister's engagement party, wearing a $200 dress and $16 million in assets no one knew about, carrying 11 years of judicial experience and a lifetime of being overlooked. And for the first time in memory, I didn't need anyone in my family to understand who I was. I just needed them to stop pretending I was who they wanted me to be. The party ended sometime after midnight, guests departing in expensive cars and leaving behind the wreckage of celebration interrupted by revelation. I stayed until the end because leaving early felt like retreat, and I had retreated enough for one lifetime. When the last guest departed, I walked to my car alone, drove down the vineyard road toward the highway, and didn't look back at the lights growing smaller in my rearview mirror. San Francisco waited ahead, my city and my chambers and my life built on foundations no one in my family had bothered to notice. Tomorrow I would return to work that mattered and cases that required my attention, and a professional identity that existed completely independent of whether my family recognized it. Tonight I had been seen against my will and against their assumptions, and the seeing had been violent in its suddenness but necessary in its completeness. I had spent 46 years being the quiet one, the grounded one, the stable foundation everyone stood on without noticing. But foundations don't stay hidden forever. Eventually, the weight becomes too much, or the structure shifts, or someone looks down and realizes that everything they built has been resting on something they never acknowledged and never thanked. Tonight, my family had looked down. What they did with that knowledge would determine everything that came next. But their response was no longer my responsibility. I had done my part by existing honestly and speaking truth when asked directly and refusing to stay small for their comfort. The rest was theirs to figure out. I had a life to return to, a career to continue, a self to reclaim from decades of erasure. And for the first time since childhood, I felt no obligation to make that reclamation easy or gentle or invisible. Silence, I had learned, is not absence. Silence is choice, and I was done choosing it. The ballroom felt different when I returned from the garden. Smaller somehow, despite unchanged dimensions. Most guests had migrated toward the bar or clustered in corners, where whispered speculation could flourish without the burden of discretion. Vivienne sat alone at what had been the head table, her silver dress no longer catching light but absorbing it, her makeup smudged in ways that suggested tears and hasty repairs. My mother stood near the terrace door speaking urgently into her phone, probably calling my father's former business partner who served as family counsel for situations requiring damage control. Marcus spoke with his father by the fountain, both men's postures conveying the particular tension that comes when celebration transforms into crisis without warning. I watched them from across the terrace and felt nothing resembling satisfaction, just a bone-deep weariness that comes from carrying weight so long you forget how heavy it is until someone forces you to set it down. The estate coordinator approached with professional concern masking personal curiosity. "Judge Whitfield, is there anything you need?" The title landed differently now, acknowledged rather than hidden, and I registered the shift in her tone from polite service to genuine deference. "I'm fine, thank you. Just some family matters to address before I leave." She nodded and retreated, leaving me standing alone in a party that had been designed around my invisibility and was now restructuring itself around my sudden, unavoidable presence. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so exhausting. Vivienne saw me and stood, unsteady in heels that had seemed effortless 3 hours earlier. She crossed the terrace with the careful steps of someone navigating uncertain ground, her face carrying an expression I had never seen directed at me before. Genuine uncertainty, mixed with something that might have been fear or respect, or the uncomfortable space where both feelings collide. "Can we talk somewhere private?" The request arrived without the usual assumption of my compliance, phrased as actual question rather than expected agreement. I gestured toward a smaller terrace off the main ballroom, a space meant for intimate conversations between guests who needed temporary escape from performative socializing. We walked there in silence, our heels clicking against marble in a rhythm that felt like countdown to something neither of us wanted, but both of us needed. The private terrace overlooked vineyards dark under stars, the September night carrying cool air that smelled of grapes and distant ocean. Vivienne leaned against the stone railing, her silver dress ghostly in dim light, her face turned away from me as if looking at the landscape might make this conversation easier than looking at her sister. "I didn't know." The words came out small, stripped of the confidence that usually armored her voice. "I really didn't know, Diana. You have to believe me." I stood several feet away, maintaining distance that felt necessary for honesty. "What didn't you know, Vivienne? That I was a federal judge, or that you never bothered to ask?" "Both. Neither. I don't know anymore." She turned to face me, mascara streaked and eyes red in ways that suggested genuine emotion rather than performed distress. "You always seem so settled, so quiet. I thought you were happy with your quiet life." The characterization landed like accusation disguised as compliment, the same pattern that had defined our relationship for 40 years. Quiet became code for lesser, settled became synonym for limited, happy became euphemism for resigned. I felt anger rise sharp and clean, the kind that burns away pretense and leaves only truth. I am happy, Vivienne. I've been happy for years, but happiness doesn't require your recognition and success doesn't need your approval. I built a life that matters, a career that shapes law, relationships with people who see me as I am, rather than who they need me to be. None of that required you to notice it, but all of it would have been easier if you'd cared enough to look. The words hit her visibly, shoulders pulling inward as if against physical impact. I wanted to look. I did. But every time I tried to ask about your work, you gave these short answers that sounded like you didn't want to talk about it. So I stopped asking. Because my short answers were complete answers that you never listened to long enough to understand. I told you I was appointed to the federal bench. You asked if I could bring wine to your party. I told you about cases I was hearing. You interrupted to talk about your Instagram engagement metrics. I showed up, Vivienne. For 40 years I showed up. You just never noticed because I wasn't performing for an audience. She flinched at performed, the word landing precisely where I intended it. Her life had been one long performance, each moment curated for maximum impact and optimal visibility. Every relationship evaluated by its contribution to her narrative of elegance and importance. My existence had never fit that aesthetic, so she had edited me down to background noise, supporting cast instead of co-star. Marcus is furious, she whispered, the admission carrying weight I hadn't expected. He wants to know why I lied about you. What else I've been lying about? His father spent 20 minutes telling him about your career, about cases you've decided, about your reputation in the legal community. And Marcus just kept asking me how I didn't know my own sister was one of the most respected judges in California. The question hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to examine too closely. How does a sister not know? The answer was simple and terrible. By choosing not to see, by deciding in advance what someone is worth and never reconsidering that valuation, by treating family as fixed categories rather than evolving people. What did you tell him? That I was self-absorbed and shallow and too focused on myself to notice anyone else. Her voice broke on the admission, genuine distress bleeding through performative composure. He agreed. He said he can't marry someone who dismisses their own family while obsessing over his family's status. He said if I could overlook a federal judge because she didn't fit my narrative of success, what else would I overlook? What else would I lie about? The engagement is over? She nodded, fresh tears tracking through makeup that had already surrendered to earlier crying. He gave the ring back 20 minutes ago, said he needed to think about whether he knows me at all. His father told him to take time, to really consider what kind of person builds a life on appearances instead of substance. The vindication I expected to feel didn't arrive. Instead, I felt something closer to sadness, the particular grief that comes from watching someone face consequences that were both inevitable and avoidable. Vivienne had built her life on beautiful surfaces, and now the foundation was cracking because she had never bothered to check if there was anything solid underneath. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it despite everything. I know this isn't the night you planned. She laughed, bitter and sharp. I planned the perfect party, planned the perfect announcement, planned my perfect future with the perfect man and his perfect, powerful family. I planned everything except being a decent human being to my own sister. The self-awareness surprised me, arriving without the usual deflection or excuse. Maybe public humiliation had achieved what private conversations never could, forcing her to see herself through others' eyes instead of her own carefully angled mirrors. What do I do now? The question emerged desperate, stripped of pretense, the voice of someone genuinely lost rather than someone performing confusion for sympathy. You apologize. To me, to Marcus, to anyone you misled about my life while promoting your own. You examine why you needed me to be small for you to feel big. And you decide who you want to be when no one's watching, because that's the only person worth being. She absorbed this in silence, shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs or maybe just exhaustion from maintaining composure through catastrophe. The night air moved between us, carrying the scent of roses and failure, the party behind us winding down into its diminished form, the future ahead uncertain in ways neither of us had anticipated when the evening began. My mother appeared in the doorway, backlit and hesitant in ways that suggested she had heard some portion of our conversation. Diana, can we talk? The request felt heavier than Vivienne's had, weighted with decades of dismissal and 46 years of choosing one daughter over the other. I looked at my mother and saw a woman who had never questioned her own narrative about her children, who had decided when we were young who we would be and never allowed for the possibility that her script might be wrong. "Not tonight," I answered, the refusal gentle but absolute. "Tonight, I'm going home. Tomorrow you can call if you want to have an actual conversation instead of another lecture about family obligations and appropriate behavior." Patricia's face crumpled, aging 10 years in the span of one expression. "We were proud of you. We would have been so proud if we'd known. You were sent every announcement, every update, every milestone. You chose not to read carefully enough to understand them. That's not my failure, Mother, that's yours." The words landed hard, but I felt no need to soften them. Honesty without cruelty is still honesty, and my mother had earned truth, even if she didn't want to hear it. I moved past her toward the main ballroom, toward the exit and my car and the drive back to San Francisco, where my real life waited, unchanged by family revelation and undiminished by their belated recognition. "Judge Whitfield?" Marcus's voice stopped me near the fountain. "Can I have a moment?" I turned to face my sister's former fiancé, this man I had never met before tonight, and would probably never see again after whatever happened next. He looked exhausted in ways that suggested emotional reckoning rather than physical fatigue. His tuxedo somehow less polished than it had been hours earlier, despite no visible change. "I owe you an apology." He spoke formally, the words carrying weight of genuine regret. "I believed what Vivienne told me about you without questioning it, without doing basic research or asking direct questions. My father raised me better than that." "You believed your fiancé. That's reasonable." "No, it's lazy." He shook his head, frustration evident in the gesture. "My father has talked about you for years. Judge Whitfield, who saved his career. Judge Whitfield, whose opinions get cited in law schools. Judge Whitfield, who writes the clearest constitutional analysis he's ever read. I heard your name dozens of times and never connected it to my fiancé's sister because I never asked her your last name. I just accepted her story about you working in county administration and never followed up." The admission carried a self-awareness that Vivienne had only started approaching, a willingness to examine his own failures that suggested character underneath the tech entrepreneur surface. I softened slightly, not forgiving but acknowledging the effort. "What will you do now?" "Take my father's advice. Take time. Figure out if Vivienne was performing for me the way she performs for her Instagram followers, or if there's someone real underneath all that curation." He paused, then continued with careful honesty. "I loved who I thought she was. I'm not sure I know who she actually is." "That makes two of us," I answered. "I've been her sister for 40 years, and I'm still trying to understand the person who could know someone that poorly while claiming to love them." We stood in shared silence for a moment, two people connected by circumstance and separated by everything else, both trying to navigate wreckage neither of us had expected to be standing in tonight. Marcus broke the quiet first. "My father wants to know if you're free for lunch next week. He said he'd like to finally thank you properly for 2008, now that the secret's out. Tell him yes, and tell him the Holloway case was just good detective work. Anyone willing to look carefully would have found the same evidence." "That's not true, and you know it." Marcus smiled slightly, the expression carrying genuine warmth despite the evening's chaos. "Most people would have looked just hard enough to confirm the accusations. You looked hard enough to find truth. There's a difference." The compliment landed more solidly than I expected. Recognition from someone who understood legal work even if he had built his career in different fields. I nodded acknowledgement and moved toward the exit, leaving behind the party that had been designed to celebrate my sister's elevation, and had instead become the setting for her humbling and my emergence. The drive back to San Francisco took 2 hours through darkness and sparse traffic, highway lights strobing past while my mind processed everything that had shattered and shifted tonight. I had revealed nothing myself. Judge Chen had done the revealing, Marcus had confirmed it, and I had simply stopped correcting the record when lies became too obvious to sustain. The distinction felt important even as the outcome remained the same. I was visible now, whether I wanted to be or not. My house in Presidio Heights sat dark and welcoming when I arrived past midnight. Victorian architecture solid and familiar in ways that felt like peace after performance. I let myself in and stood in the entryway looking at the life I had built without anyone's permission or recognition. The home I owned outright, and the career I had constructed through competence rather than connections. The message light on my phone blinked with voicemails I didn't check and texts I didn't read. Tomorrow would bring consequences and conversations, reactions and reckonings. Tonight, I just wanted to exist in the quiet space between revelation and response, to breathe air that didn't carry the weight of family expectations or the burden of managed appearances. I changed out of my navy dress and into comfortable clothes, poured a glass of wine from a bottle that cost $40 instead of $400, and sat on my back deck looking at the San Francisco skyline glittering in the distance. My real life, I thought. My actual career and genuine achievements and honest relationships. All of it had existed before tonight's revelation, and all of it would continue after, unchanged by whether my family finally understood what I had been trying to tell them for 11 years. Sleep came eventually, dreamless and heavy. I woke Sunday morning to 73 text messages, 14 voicemails, and 3 emails from addresses I didn't recognize. The avalanche of reaction felt exhausting before I even opened any of it. People suddenly interested in my life now that they understood its actual dimensions rather than their assumed limitations. One email caught my attention. The subject line simple and direct. "We need to talk about the trust." The sender was a law firm I didn't recognize, Morrison and Associates, with a San Francisco address and a message that began, "We represent Patricia Whitfield regarding the Whitfield Family Trust established by Robert Whitfield in 2002. Recent events have raised questions about trust administration that require your immediate attention as primary beneficiary." Primary beneficiary. The phrase registered with the particular clarity that legal training provides, the recognition that words in estate documents carry specific meaning and concrete consequences. My father had died in 2003 when I was 25 years old, leaving behind investments in property and a trust I had assumed was structured equally between Vivienne and me. I had received distributions annually, modest amounts that I had reinvested without questioning the structure or examining the documents closely. I opened my files and found the trust paperwork I had been sent 21 years ago, pages I had skimmed and signed and filed away, because my father's attorney had explained them as standard estate planning. Reading now with attention instead of grief, I saw what I had missed in the shock of early loss. 60% to Diana Morgan Whitfield, 40% to Vivienne Claire Whitfield, with Patricia Whitfield serving as trustee until her death or incapacity. 60%, not 50, 60. My father had given me majority share of his estate, had trusted me with primary control, had recognized in death what he had never quite acknowledged in life, that I was the daughter built for stewardship, for careful management, for long-term thinking that extended beyond immediate gratification. And my mother had been managing this trust for 21 years, distributing funds and making decisions, never once mentioning that my share was larger than my sister's, or that I held majority interest in assets I had never examined closely enough to understand. I called the law firm at 9 Monday morning, was connected to a partner named Sarah Morrison, whose voice carried the particular precision of someone who had reviewed documents carefully and found concerning patterns. "Judge Whitfield, thank you for calling. We need to discuss some irregularities in the Whitfield Trust Administration." "What kind of irregularities?" "Distributions that exceed standard trustee compensation. Transfers from your 60% share to your sister's 40% share without documented authorization. Loans to your mother that were never repaid. We represent your sister in a petition for full accounting and transparency. She filed Friday, before the engagement party. The timing was coincidental. Vivienne filed for accounting?" The surprise must have shown in my voice because Morrison's response carried understanding beneath professional neutrality. "She suspected financial mismanagement. Your mother has been less than forthcoming about trust performance and asset distribution. Your sister requested documentation 3 months ago. When your mother delayed, she retained counsel." The revelation shifted everything I thought I understood about the previous night. Vivienne hadn't just been shocked by my career revelation. She had been navigating her own financial crisis, her own discovery of family betrayal, her own reckoning with a mother who managed money the way she managed truth, flexibly and to her own advantage. "What are we talking about in terms of irregularities?" "Approximately $3.7 million over 21 years. withdrawn from your share and distributed to your sister without your authorization or knowledge. Another $800,000 in trustee fees that exceed standard rates. The trust should hold approximately $24 million in assets. Current value is $19.2 million. The numbers landed with the weight of hard evidence, documentation of exactly what I had suspected in abstract but never examined in detail. My mother taking what was mine and giving it to Vivienne, funding my sister's lifestyle with my inheritance, redistributing wealth to maintain the family dynamic where one daughter received everything and the other received whatever was left over. I'll need to recuse myself from any legal proceedings. Family conflict of interest. We anticipated that. Morrison's voice carried professional sympathy beneath legal formality. We've already requested assignment to Judge Patricia Crawford in the Northern District, but we need your cooperation as primary beneficiary. You have the right to petition for removal of trustee and full accounting independent of your sister's request. The suggestion opened doors I hadn't considered. Legal remedies for financial betrayal that existed independent of family relationship or emotional complexity. I was a federal judge who had spent 11 years adjudicating complex disputes. I understood standing and jurisdiction, fiduciary duty and breach of trust. What I hadn't understood was how those legal concepts would feel when applied to my own family. Send me the documents. I'll review everything and respond by end of week. We hung up, and I sat in my chambers looking out at San Francisco Bay, processing the intersection of professional knowledge and personal betrayal. My mother had stolen from me for 21 years. Not dramatically, not obviously, just steadily and systematically, redistributing my inheritance to fund Vivienne's lifestyle, while I built my career and managed my finances and assumed my family was at least financially honest, even if they were emotionally negligent. The case files on my desk suddenly felt simpler than my own life. Disputes between strangers easier to adjudicate than conflicts between family members who had spent decades lying to each other and themselves about what they were doing and why. My phone rang Tuesday morning while I was reviewing depositions for a securities fraud case. Vivienne's name on the screen, the first time she had called in 3 months, the first time she had initiated contact in probably 3 years. I let it ring twice more before answering, giving myself time to shift from judicial neutrality to whatever emotional stance felt appropriate for talking to a sister who was simultaneously victim and beneficiary of our mother's financial misconduct. Diana? Her voice sounded smaller than it had Saturday night, stripped of performance and reduced to something approaching genuine vulnerability. Did the lawyers call you? They did. Why didn't you tell me you suspected financial problems? Because I thought it was my problem. She paused, the silence carrying weight of admission. I thought Mom was taking from my share to cover my lifestyle. I thought I had spent too much and there wasn't enough left. I didn't know she was taking from you to give to me. The confession arrived without excuse or deflection, just plain statement of what she had believed and what she had discovered. I processed this information against everything I knew about my sister, about her spending patterns and financial awareness, about the way she had navigated 2 divorces, and emerged with settlements that should have been sufficient for comfortable living. How much do you think you received that was actually mine? All of it, probably. Her voice broke on the admission. The divorce settlements covered my condos and cars. Everything else, the designer clothes, the Instagram lifestyle, the gallery openings and charity events, Mom said it was trust distributions from my share. I never questioned it because I thought Dad left us equal amounts. I didn't know you got 60%. I didn't know she was robbing you to bankroll me. Did you know I owned commercial property? That I had investments worth millions? Number 1, I swear, Diana, I thought you made $60,000 a year and lived modestly because that's what public servants do. I'm stupid and self-absorbed and I never asked the right questions. But I didn't know Mom was stealing from you to fund my life. The defense arrived without the usual protective coating of blame shifting or responsibility dodging. Vivienne sounded genuinely devastated, her voice carrying the particular timbre of someone confronting their own complicity in systems they had benefited from without examining closely enough to understand. What do you want to happen now? I want to make it right. She spoke quickly, words tumbling over each other with urgent sincerity. I want you to get back what's yours. I want Mom held accountable. and I want to understand how I spent 40 years being so completely blind to everything and everyone around me. The admission felt like the beginning of something. Maybe not reconciliation, but at least recognition. The first honest acknowledgement of what our relationship had actually been, instead of what we had both pretended it was. I softened slightly. Not forgiving, but allowing space for the possibility of future forgiveness if she proved willing to do the work required for genuine change. The lawyers will handle the financial recovery. What you do about the blindness is your own work to figure out. I'm starting therapy Thursday. Real therapy, not the life coach bullshit I was doing before. She paused, then continued with careful honesty. Marcus said he might consider trying again if I can demonstrate actual personal growth instead of just performed contrition. I don't know if that's possible, but I need to try whether he comes back or not. The self-awareness surprised me again, arriving more developed than Saturday night's initial shock had suggested possible. Maybe some people could change when confronted with consequences severe enough to penetrate years of accumulated self-deception. Maybe Vivienne was one of them. Or maybe this was just another performance refined for a more discerning audience. Time would reveal which. Good. And Vivienne, I'm not ready to forgive you yet. I might never be. But I am willing to see if you can become someone worth forgiving. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. We disconnected and I returned to the securities fraud depositions, to disputes that could be resolved through evidence and argument rather than emotion and history. My work felt cleaner somehow, more honest in its conflicts and clearer in its resolutions. People lied in courtrooms, but they lied in discoverable ways, creating records that could be examined and contradicted and proven false. Family lies were subtler, maintained through omission and assumption, through choosing not to see and declining to question. The deposition continued until late afternoon when my law clerk knocked with unusual hesitation. Judge Whitfield? There's someone here who says he has an appointment, but he's not on the calendar. Professor Daniel Rothschild from Berkeley Law? The name registered with the particular clarity of professional reputation preceding personal introduction. Daniel Rothschild had argued constitutional cases before the Ninth Circuit for 3 decades, had written influential articles on federalism and separation of powers, had taught generations of lawyers to think rigorously about questions that mattered. I had read his work, had cited it in opinions, had occasionally disagreed with his reasoning in written decisions that engaged his arguments respectfully, even while rejecting his conclusions. Send him in. The man who entered my chambers looked like his author photo aged 12 years gracefully, 58 with silver hair and intelligent eyes, wearing a sport coat that suggested Berkeley rather than corporate law, carrying himself with the particular confidence that comes from knowing your work matters without needing constant validation. He extended his hand with professional courtesy. Judge Whitfield, thank you for seeing me without appointment. I took a chance that you might have a few minutes. I have 20 before my next conference call. What can I do for you, Professor? He settled into the chair across from my desk with the ease of someone accustomed to academic conversations in informal settings. I was at the ABA conference in wine country this weekend. Attended your sister's engagement party as Judge Chen's guest. I saw what happened. The revelation shifted the meeting's context immediately. This wasn't a legal consultation or scholarly discussion. This was someone who had witnessed my family's public unraveling and had decided to follow up in ways I couldn't quite categorize as appropriate or inappropriate, welcome or intrusive. I'm sorry you had to see that. Family drama isn't usually so spectacularly public. Don't apologize. He leaned forward slightly, his expression carrying genuine rather than performative interest. I've known about your work for years. I've cited your opinions in my constitutional law seminar. I've recommended your ruling in Morrison v. State to every student who wants to understand statutory interpretation done right. And I've wondered why someone of your caliber wasn't already on the Ninth Circuit. The compliment landed differently than Marcus's had, carrying weight of professional evaluation rather than grateful acknowledgement. This was a scholar who understood legal reasoning telling me my reasoning was excellent. The validation felt substantial in ways I hadn't expected to matter. I was shortlisted twice, wasn't selected either time. I know, I was on the advisory committee in 2017. His admission arrived with careful deliberation, the tone of someone sharing information they had considered whether to reveal. Your name came up, and the background investigation included family interviews. What they reported raised concerns about interpersonal skills and emotional stability, The floor seemed to drop beneath my chair, the room tilting as I processed what he was saying. My mother and sister had been interviewed about my fitness for judicial elevation, had been asked to speak to my character and judgment, and had said things that cost me the Ninth Circuit. Not through malice, necessarily, but through the same casual dismissal they had applied to every other aspect of my existence. What exactly did they say? That you were brilliant but cold, successful in your career but disconnected from family, capable professionally but questionable in personal judgment because you had never maintained long-term relationships. His voice carried sympathy beneath factual recitation. The committee interpreted their statements as red flags about judicial temperament. They chose other candidates both times. The betrayal hit harder than the financial theft, more personal than the monetary loss. My mother and sister hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my career advancement, had described me to judicial evaluators in ways that made me sound emotionally unstable or interpersonally deficient, had damaged my professional reputation while benefiting from my financial support. The irony was so bitter I almost laughed. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserved to know, and because I wanted you to understand that their assessment was wrong. He spoke with quiet conviction, professor delivering verdict based on evidence rather than assumption. I've watched you in court. I've read your opinions. I've seen how you treat attorneys who appear before you and clerks who work for you. You're not cold. You're careful. You're not disconnected. You're discerning. Those are virtues in a judge, not deficiencies. The defense arrived unexpected and unearned, this stranger understanding in 20 minutes what my family had failed to see in 46 years. I felt something shift in my chest. Not quite tears, but close. The particular tightness that comes when someone sees you clearly and likes what they see, instead of demanding you become something else. Thank you. That means more than you probably realize. I realize exactly how much it means. He smiled slightly, the expression warm without being presumptuous. Which brings me to the actual reason I'm here. I'd like to take you to dinner, not as a judge and constitutional scholar, as two people who understand what it costs to do work that matters and maintain integrity while doing it. The invitation arrived clear and direct, free of the performative complexity that characterized most attempts at connection. This was a man asking a woman to dinner, offering company without agenda, extending interest without expectation. The simplicity felt radical after a lifetime of conversations coded with subtext and weighted with assumption. I'd like that. But I should warn you, my family situation is complicated right now. I saw your family situation Saturday night. His response carried understanding without judgment. I'm offering dinner, not marriage. Just conversation between adults who appreciate good food and honest discussion. If it leads somewhere, excellent. If not, we'll have had a nice evening and maybe learned something interesting. The reasonableness felt almost disorienting after years of relationships that required constant management and emotional labor. This was someone offering exactly what he said, and asking nothing beyond basic human company. I found myself smiling genuinely for the first time since Saturday night. Friday at 7? I'll pick you up. He stood with the same easy confidence he had arrived with, extending his hand again in farewell. And Judge Whitfield, what your family did to you was wrong. How you handled it Saturday night was right. Never apologize for being seen. He left, and I sat in my chambers processing the peculiar lightness that comes when someone offers respect without requiring you to earn it first. My phone buzzed with another message from my mother requesting to talk, another text from Vivienne asking about legal proceedings, another email from lawyers coordinating trust litigation. But underneath all that noise sat the possibility of dinner with someone who understood my work and appreciated my judgment, and wasn't asking me to be smaller or quieter or more convenient for anyone else's comfort. The trust litigation moved forward with the inexorable momentum of legal process applied to documented facts. Depositions were scheduled, subpoenas issued, forensic accountants retained to trace 21 years of distributions and transfers. My mother hired her own attorney, a man named Gerald Bishop, who specialized in estate disputes and wealthy clients who needed aggressive defense against family members seeking accountability. The preliminary hearing took place 3 weeks after the engagement party in Judge Patricia Crawford's courtroom, a windowless space in the federal building where I had practiced law as a prosecutor and now served as a colleague on the same floor. I attended as beneficiary rather than judge, sitting in the gallery while lawyers argued about discovery schedules and document production and whether Patricia Whitfield had breached her fiduciary duty as trustee. My mother sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered, 68 years old and diminished by legal process that stripped away social performance and left only factual accountability. Her attorney argued that all distributions were proper, all transfers authorized, all trustee fees reasonable, given the complexity of managing assets over 2 decades. The argument sounded professional and polished and completely disconnected from documented evidence, showing systematic diversion of funds. Sarah Morrison countered with spreadsheets and bank records, transaction histories that painted a clear picture of trustee misconduct. $3.7 million withdrawn from Diana's 60% share and distributed to Vivienne's 40% share without authorization. $800,000 in trustee fees that exceeded standard rates by factors of 3 to 5. Loans to Patricia herself that were never repaid and barely documented. The judge listened with the particular attention that comes from years of hearing people lie creatively and learning to recognize when documentation contradicts testimony. She ruled from the bench, ordering full accounting within 30 days and temporary suspension of all distributions pending further review. My mother's face crumpled at the ruling, aging another decade in the span of one gavel strike. I left before the hearing concluded, unwilling to watch my mother's humiliation, even after everything she had done. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have, the silence inside the car creating space for thoughts I didn't want to examine about family and forgiveness, about justice and mercy, about the difference between legal remedy and emotional healing. Vivienne waited outside the building, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater instead of her usual designer presentation. She had lost weight, the kind that comes from stress rather than intention, and her face carried the particular exhaustion of someone doing difficult emotional work without the buffer of performance or pretense. "I didn't know you'd be here. I wanted to see what accountability looks like," she spoke quietly, her voice carrying none of the performative confidence that had characterized our previous conversations. Mom's attorney says she might face criminal charges if the forensic accountants find deliberate fraud instead of just mismanagement. The possibility of criminal prosecution hung between us, heavy and terrible. The natural consequence of financial betrayal severe enough to cross from civil dispute into criminal conduct. I felt no satisfaction at the prospect, just weary recognition that actions have consequences, and family relationship doesn't exempt anyone from facing them. That's not my decision. That's the U.S. Attorney's Office if they decide to pursue it. I know. She paused, then continued with careful vulnerability. I'm selling the condo, Richard's condo, the one from the divorce settlement. It's worth $2.4 million. I want to give you the proceeds. It won't cover what Mom took, but it's what I have. The offer surprised me despite everything that had shifted in recent weeks. Vivienne volunteering to liquidate her primary asset, to give up the security that divorce had provided, to attempt restitution even though she hadn't been the one who stole. The gesture felt genuine in ways her previous apologies had only approached. "You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do." Her voice firmed with conviction I hadn't heard from her before. "I benefited from theft even if I didn't know it was theft. I lived on your money while thinking you were poor. I dismissed your achievements while spending your inheritance. I can't fix who I was, but I can start choosing who I want to become. And that person pays her debts. Keep the condo. Build a life that isn't funded by anyone else's loss. That's better restitution than money." She absorbed this in silence, shoulders straightening slightly as if permission to keep her home had lifted weight she didn't realize she was carrying. We stood outside the federal building in afternoon sun that felt too bright for the conversation we were having. Two sisters connected by blood and separated by everything else, both trying to navigate territory neither of us had mapped before. "Marcus and I are trying again." The admission arrived tentative, offered like a gift I might not want to accept. Couples therapy twice a week. Individual therapy besides. He says he wants to see if the person underneath all my performance is someone he can love for real, instead of loving the image I projected. I hope she is, genuinely. Me too. Vivienne smiled slightly, the expression carrying more uncertainty than her previous confident smiles, but feeling more honest for it. Thank you for not hating me. I don't hate you. I'm just done being invisible so you can shine brighter. Fair enough. She turned to leave, then paused. Diana? I read your ruling in Morrison versus State. I didn't understand most of it, but I could tell it was brilliant. I'm sorry I never bothered to look before. The acknowledgement landed with surprising weight, recognition arriving years too late, but arriving nonetheless. I nodded acceptance and watched my sister walk away, her posture carrying less confidence than it used to, but more substance, less performance and more presence. Friday arrived with the particular anticipation that comes before first dates and new possibilities, the nervous energy of hoping for connection while protecting against disappointment. Daniel picked me up at 7 in a practical sedan that suggested Berkeley professor rather than tech executive, wearing a sport coat and jeans that split the difference between formal and casual. Dinner unfolded at a restaurant in North Beach, Italian food that prioritized quality over presentation, wine chosen for taste rather than label recognition. We talked about constitutional law and judicial philosophy, about teaching and writing, and the peculiar satisfaction of watching students grasp complex concepts after struggling to understand them. The conversation flowed easily, built on mutual respect and genuine interest, free from the performance that had characterized my sister's entire existence. He asked about my family situation without making it the center of discussion, acknowledged the difficulty without demanding emotional labor or detailed explanation. I appreciated the balance, the understanding that recent events mattered, without requiring me to process them publicly or perform vulnerability for someone else's comfort. Your ruling in Chen versus DOJ changed how I teach whistleblower protection. He spoke between courses, his tone carrying academic enthusiasm tempered by professional respect. The way you balance statutory text with constitutional principles, the clarity of your reasoning about public interest and governmental accountability, it's exactly what good judging looks like. You argued the opposite position in Morrison, lost 6-3. I did, and I was wrong. He smiled without defensiveness. You wrote the majority opinion that exposed every weakness in my argument. I was better for losing because you made me better by beating me. The admission carried a humility rare in academic circles. Willingness to acknowledge defeat as learning opportunity rather than personal diminishment. I found myself relaxing into the conversation, enjoying the particular pleasure of talking with someone who understood my work without requiring translation or simplification. Why aren't you married? The question arrived gently, framed as curiosity rather than judgment. Because I spent 46 years building a career that mattered more to me than performing for someone else's approval. Most men I've met wanted a partner who enhanced their image rather than challenged their assumptions. That didn't interest me. My wife died 5 years ago. Cancer. He spoke matter-of-factly, acknowledging loss without dwelling in it. We were married 32 years. She was brilliant and difficult, and the only person who ever made me want to be better than I was. I miss her every day, and I'm done pretending I don't want companionship, because nothing will measure up to what we had. The honesty arrived complete and undefended, an adult acknowledging human need without apologizing for it or dressing it up as something else. I appreciated the directness, the refusal to perform grief or independence, the simple acknowledgement that life continues, and sometimes lonely people want to be less lonely without pretending they're whole without connection. What are you looking for? Someone interesting who makes me laugh and challenges my thinking. Someone who doesn't need me to be anything other than who I am. Someone who understands that professional excellence and personal warmth aren't mutually exclusive. He paused, then continued with slight smile. Someone who writes judicial opinions clear enough to teach from and fierce enough to make opponents reconsider their entire legal theory. The compliment landed wrapped in humor, but carrying genuine appreciation beneath it. I laughed, surprising myself with the sound, realizing I had spent recent weeks processing crisis and hadn't allowed space for simple pleasure or uncomplicated enjoyment. Dinner ended late, conversation extending past dessert and coffee into the comfortable territory where time becomes irrelevant because the company makes hours feel like minutes. Daniel walked me to my door with old-fashioned courtesy, made no presumptions about continuation or expectation. I'd like to do this again, soon and often, if you're willing. I'm willing, more willing than I expected to be. Good. He smiled, the expression warm and genuine in the porch light. You deserve someone who sees you, Diana. All of you. Not just the parts that fit their narrative about who you should be. The words settled into my chest like benediction, acknowledgement I hadn't known I needed until someone offered it without prompting. I watched him drive away and stood on my porch breathing San Francisco night air that smelled like fog and possibility, feeling lighter than I had in weeks despite the ongoing litigation and family fracture. The trust accounting arrived 6 weeks after the engagement party, 200 pages documenting 21 years of mismanagement and systematic diversion of funds. The forensic accountants had traced every transfer, categorized every distribution, calculated compound interest on funds that should have remained in my share, but had been redirected to Vivienne's accounts or Patricia's personal use. Total amount misappropriated, $4.9 million including interest. Current trust deficit, $5.1 million when accounting for lost investment growth. Recommended remedies: full restitution, removal of trustee, criminal referral for potential fraud charges. The numbers existed independent of family relationship. Documentation of betrayal that would exist whether I forgave my mother or not, whether I reconciled with my sister or not, whether any of us ever spoke again or not. Justice lived in accounting ledgers and bank transfers, in paper trails that told stories more honest than any conversation we had ever had about money and fairness and who deserved what. My mother's attorney negotiated settlement to avoid criminal prosecution. Patricia would repay $4.9 million over 10 years at market interest rate, relinquish all trustee authority, enter family therapy as condition of avoiding jail time. The terms felt both harsh and merciful: accountability without destruction, consequence without complete condemnation. I sat in my chambers reviewing the settlement documents and thought about mercy and justice, about the difference between what law requires and what healing needs, about whether forgiveness was possible or even desirable when someone had spent 2 decades stealing from you while convincing themselves they were helping family. My mother called that evening, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. Diana, can we talk? The request arrived stripped of assumption or demand. Just simple question from someone who had lost the right to expect anything, but was asking anyway. I considered saying no, considered maintaining distance that felt protective and necessary. But something in her voice suggested genuine desperation, rather than performed contrition. 20 minutes, my house, don't bring an attorney or an agenda. She arrived 15 minutes later, dressed simply in clothes that suggested she had stopped trying to impress anyone and had started trying to survive instead. We sat in my living room with coffee neither of us drank, 2 women connected by blood and separated by decades of dismissal and theft. I didn't think I was stealing, she spoke quietly, the words arriving without excuse, but with explanation. I thought I was helping Vivienne, supporting the daughter who needed support because you were always so capable, so independent, so able to handle everything yourself. So you took what was mine and gave it to her because I didn't need it as much? Yes. No. I don't know anymore. Her voice broke on the confusion, genuine distress bleeding through attempted composure. You were always so competent. You built this amazing career and this beautiful life, and you didn't seem to need us at all. Vivienne was fragile. She needed help. I thought I was being a good mother by supporting the child who was struggling. But you never asked what I needed. You never considered that competence doesn't mean immunity to pain or independence, doesn't mean indifference to family. You just decided I was fine without you and acted accordingly. You're right. The admission arrived complete and undefended. I was wrong about everything, about you, about Vivienne, about what being a good mother meant. I prioritized appearance over substance and performance over presence. And I cost you millions of dollars and a seat on the Ninth Circuit, and any reason to trust me ever again. The acknowledgement of the Ninth Circuit cost hit hardest. Recognition that she understood exactly what her words to background investigators had taken from me. I felt tears threaten for the first time since Saturday's revelation. Not from sadness, but from the exhausted relief of finally being seen accurately instead of conveniently. What do you want from me, Mother? Permission to try again. She looked at me with red eyes and genuine desperation. Not to fix what I broke because that's impossible. Just permission to show up honestly going forward instead of performing the mother I thought I should be. The request felt both too much and exactly right. Asking for something I didn't know if I could give, but presenting it honestly enough that refusal felt unnecessarily cruel. I sat in silence processing whether forgiveness required trust or whether they could exist separately. Mercy without restored relationship. Acknowledgement without absolution. I'll see you at family therapy. That's all I can promise right now. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. She left and I sat alone in the quiet that followed. My house settling around me in the particular way homes do, when crisis has passed and ordinary life resumes. Outside my windows, San Francisco glittered in the darkness. My city and my career and my life built on foundations no one had bothered to notice until forced revelation made invisibility impossible. The litigation settled before trial. Patricia agreed to all terms, signed documents that made her accountability permanent and enforceable, attended the first family therapy session with the defeated air of someone who had finally run out of ways to avoid facing themselves. Vivienne sold her condo and split proceeds between restitution payment and down payment on smaller apartment, choosing financial independence over lifestyle maintenance. Marcus proposed again in December, simpler ring and private ceremony, relationship rebuilt on honest foundation instead of performed perfection. I attended the wedding as guest rather than background, sat in the front row as sister acknowledged rather than sister erased, watched Vivienne marry the man she almost lost by being unwilling to see anyone but herself. Daniel became a constant presence without becoming intrusive. Dinners that extended into weekends. Weekends that suggested futures. Futures that felt possible without requiring performance or pretense. He met my family at Thanksgiving dinner, charmed my mother with academic conversation, and impressed my sister by actually listening when she talked. Treated me with the consistent respect that suggested this might be what healthy relationship looked like, when neither person needed the other to be smaller or different or more convenient. Christmas arrived with snow unusual for San Francisco. The city transformed into something prettier than its usual self. I stood in my backyard watching flakes fall against dark sky and thought about everything that had shattered and shifted since September's revelation, about the family I had lost and the self I had found, about the difference between being seen reluctantly and being seen willingly. My phone buzzed with a message from Judge Chen. Congratulations on your nomination. Well-deserved and long overdue. The confusion lasted only seconds before the email arrived from the Ninth Circuit Judicial Nominating Commission. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for recommendation to the President for appointment to the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. The elevation I had been denied twice before. The advancement my family's dismissal had cost me. The recognition that had felt impossible until I stopped hiding from my own visibility. The nomination arrived not because I had changed, but because the record spoke for itself once investigators asked people who actually knew my work, instead of people who had decided in advance what my work must be worth. I called Daniel first, heard his genuine pleasure at news that meant something to both of us. Then I called Vivienne, who cried with happiness that sounded real rather than performed. Then I called my mother, who offered congratulations that carried weight of genuine pride alongside acknowledged regret. Last, I walked to my window and looked at my city covered in unexpected snow. Transformation that made familiar territory strange and beautiful in new ways. I had spent 46 years learning to speak through silence, to exist through invisibility, to matter without being noticed. And then, in one September evening, everything changed. Not because I chose revelation, but because truth became too large to contain, and someone else spoke it first. Being seen had cost me family comfort and relationship stability and the protection that comes from low expectations. But being seen had also given me back myself, had forced confrontation that led to accountability, had cleared space for relationships built on respect rather than performance. The snow continued falling, covering everything in white that would melt by morning, but was beautiful now in its temporary transformation. I thought about federal appeals courts and family therapy, about honest relationships and hard-won recognition, about the peculiar freedom that comes when you stop trying to earn what should have been given freely and start building what matters independently of anyone's permission. Silence is not absence, I had learned. Silence is choice. But sometimes the most powerful choice is deciding when silence ends and truth begins, even if the beginning comes harder and later and more painfully than you ever wanted it to. The snow fell, and I stood watching it. A federal judge nominated to the appellate bench, a sister learning to be seen, a daughter teaching her mother what accountability looks like. A woman finally free from the burden of making herself small for anyone else's comfort. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but honest, built on foundation visible to everyone, including myself. And that visibility, earned through confrontation and maintained through courage, felt like the truest form of justice I had ever known. January arrived cold and clear, the new year bringing with it the particular weight of transformation that can't be undone or ignored. 3 months had passed since the Ninth Circuit nomination. 2 months since Christmas snow had blanketed San Francisco in temporary beauty. 6 weeks since the Senate Judiciary Committee had scheduled my confirmation hearing for late February. The calendar measured time in increments that felt both too fast and impossibly slow, each day bringing me closer to elevation I had wanted for years and farther from the family I had known my entire life. The Sonoma vineyard required attention I hadn't anticipated when I took control of the trust assets. 120 acres of grapevines stretching across hills that my father had purchased 40 years ago as investment, and my mother had neglected as inconvenient complication to her preferred lifestyle. The property manager I inherited had been competent enough to keep vines alive, but unimaginative enough to miss opportunities for increased revenue and sustainable practices that would have tripled value over 2 decades. I drove to Sonoma on a Saturday morning in early January, Daniel beside me in comfortable silence that suggested relationship deepening without requiring constant conversation or performance. The vineyard looked different under winter light, vines dormant and hills brown where summer would bring green, the landscape honest in its seasonal rest rather than performing perpetual abundance. The new property manager met us at the main house, a woman named Catherine Wells who specialized in sustainable viticulture and had turned 3 failing vineyards into profitable operations through careful attention to soil health and market positioning. She walked us through the rows, explaining what she had found in initial assessment and what she proposed for spring planting. Your father bought premium land but never invested in premium practices. She gestured toward vines that looked healthy from distance but showed signs of stress up close. With proper organic certification and partnership with the right wine collective, this property could generate $1.2 million annually instead of the $400,000 it's been producing. The numbers represented not just revenue, but validation of my father's original instinct overlaid with my own management philosophy. He had recognized value. I would actualize it. The symmetry felt appropriate for property that represented both inheritance and independence, family legacy and individual achievement. What do you need from me? Capital investment upfront for organic transition and certification. Approximately $200,000. Then trust in my process and patience for results that won't show fully for 3 to 5 years. The timeline felt right for transformation that mattered, change that required sustained effort rather than quick cosmetic improvement. I approved the investment that afternoon, signed documents that committed resources to long-term growth, chose partnership with Sustainable Wine Collective that valued ecological responsibility alongside profit margin. Daniel walked the property with me after Catherine left, both of us quiet in the way people can be when comfortable silence feels more intimate than constant conversation. We stopped at the highest point overlooking the valley, winter sun slanting across dormant vines and distant hills that probably looked the same as they had when my father first stood here decades ago. This is beautiful. He spoke softly, acknowledging landscape without needing to fill it with commentary. Your father chose well. He did. I just wish he'd known I would be the one to see it through instead of assuming I needed protection from responsibility. Maybe he knew and trusted your mother to tell you when the time was right. Maybe he didn't anticipate she would use his trust as opportunity for control. The generous interpretation felt characteristic of Daniel's approach to human behavior, assuming complexity instead of malice, allowing space for failure without requiring condemnation. I appreciated the perspective even as I doubted its accuracy in this specific case. My father had loved both daughters, but understood only one. had provided for both, but trusted only one with majority stake. That understanding had been prescient, even if he couldn't have anticipated how badly my mother would abuse her trustee authority. The confirmation hearing loomed 3 weeks away, preparation consuming evenings and weekends with mock questioning and document review. The Senate Judiciary Committee would examine every opinion I had written, every case I had decided, every public statement I had made over 11 years on the district bench. They would ask about judicial philosophy and constitutional interpretation, about temperament and impartiality, about whether I could serve on an appellate court with the same integrity I had demonstrated at trial level. Sarah Morrison helped prepare responses to anticipated questions about the family trust litigation, about whether personal financial disputes would affect my judicial decision-making or create appearance of impropriety. We crafted answers that acknowledged the situation, while emphasizing that I had recused myself from direct involvement, and that all proceedings had been handled by other judges in accordance with ethical requirements. The harder questions came from Daniel during practice sessions at his Berkeley home, constitutional scholars testing my reasoning with hypotheticals designed to expose inconsistency or reveal ideological bias. He pushed me on questions about federalism and separation of powers, about statutory interpretation and deference to administrative agencies, about how I balance text and purpose when they seem to point in different directions. You're too careful in your answers. He set down his notes after 2 hours of questioning that felt more grueling than actual Senate hearings. You're so concerned with appearing neutral that you're hiding your actual reasoning process. I need to appear neutral, that's the job. No, you need to be principled. Neutral is impossible. Every judge brings philosophy to the bench. The question is whether that philosophy is coherent and consistently applied, or whether it shifts based on preferred outcomes. The distinction resonated with understanding I had been circling without quite grasping. Judges weren't supposed to be blank slates. We were supposed to be clear thinkers, whose reasoning could be followed and challenged and evaluated for consistency. Pretending I had no judicial philosophy was less honest than articulating what I believed and demonstrating how that belief led to principled outcomes, even in cases where I might prefer different results. We practiced late into January evenings, Daniel playing skeptical senator while I refined answers that were honest without being vulnerable, principled without being ideological, clear without being simplistic. The process felt like the best kind of intellectual challenge, two people who respected each other working to sharpen thinking that mattered. Family therapy continued monthly, sessions that felt productive in ways I hadn't expected when they began. My mother attended faithfully, arriving early and staying late, doing assigned reading about financial abuse and family dynamics with the desperate attention of someone trying to understand how she had become person she never intended to be. Vivienne came with notebooks full of questions, observations about her own behavior patterns, and the ways performance had replaced presence in every relationship she had ever attempted. The February session fell 3 days before my confirmation hearing, tension obvious in the small room where we gathered with Dr. Rebecca Santos, the therapist who specialized in family reconstruction after betrayal. Patricia sat with posture that suggested she had aged 10 years in 4 months. Vivienne beside her looking thinner and somehow more substantial simultaneously, as if losing physical weight had made her emotional presence more solid. Dr. Santos opened with direct question that characterized her approach to therapy, that prioritized honest confrontation over comfortable avoidance. Diana, you've been accepted to the Ninth Circuit. How does that feel given what you've learned about your family's role in previous rejections? The question landed precisely where it hurt, exposing intersection of achievement and betrayal that I had been processing privately without adequate space to acknowledge publicly. I chose my words carefully, trying for honesty that didn't require anyone to absolve what couldn't be forgiven. It feels like vindication and loss simultaneously. Vindication because the work spoke for itself once investigators talked to people who knew my actual character. Loss because my own family's assessment cost me years on a court, where I could have been shaping law and training clerks and contributing to constitutional development that matters. Patricia made small sound of pain, her hands twisting in her lap with agitation that suggested genuine distress rather than performed remorse. I never knew those interviews would hurt you. I thought I was being honest about your independence and professional focus. You were being honest about how you saw me. The problem is you never bothered to see me accurately. You decided when I was 12 that I was the grounded one who didn't need encouragement, and you never reconsidered that assessment despite decades of evidence that I was building something that deserved recognition. Vivienne spoke quietly, her voice carrying less performance than any tone I had heard from her before therapy. I told them you were cold because that's what I needed to believe. If you were warm and I still didn't connect with you, that made me the problem. If you were cold, I could blame our distance on your deficiency instead of my self-absorption. The admission arrived without excuse, just plain statement of psychological defense mechanism that had protected her self-image at cost of my professional advancement. I absorbed it without comment, recognizing truth without needing to absolve or condemn. Dr. Santos pushed further, her questions precise and uncomfortable. Diana, what do you need from your mother and sister to move forward? Not to forgive, not to forget, just to establish relationship that doesn't require you to keep protecting yourself from people who should be safe. The question forced articulation of needs I had been avoiding examining too closely. I sat with it for a long moment before answering, trying to separate what I wanted from what I could reasonably request, what they could provide from what no amount of effort would restore. I need honesty without expectation of absolution. I need acknowledgement that what happened was wrong, without requiring me to say it's okay now that you understand. I need you both to build lives that aren't centered on my achievements or my approval, so I can have relationship with you that isn't about managing your emotions about my success. Can you do that? Dr. Santos turned to Patricia and Vivienne, her tone making clear this was commitment question, not rhetorical exercise. Yes, Patricia spoke first, her voice shaking but determined. I'm selling the Pacific Heights house, moving to a smaller place where I can live on Social Security and modest investment income without dipping into what's left of the trust. I'm volunteering at Literacy Center because I need purpose that isn't managing other people's lives. And I'm writing you letters I don't send, processing my own guilt without making it your responsibility to comfort me through it. The plan sounded genuine and appropriately self-focused. My mother finally taking responsibility for her own emotional work instead of distributing it to daughters who had carried it too long. I nodded acknowledgement without offering praise, recognition without requiring her to perform growth for my approval. I'm working. Vivienne's answer came quieter, but no less committed. Actual work with actual paycheck that covers actual rent. I'm off Instagram entirely. Deleted the account because I need to learn who I am without audience validation. Marcus and I are rebuilding slowly, couples therapy twice weekly, both of us learning to be honest about needs instead of performing compatibility. And I'm reading everything you've ever written that's publicly available because I need to understand what I missed while I was too busy looking at myself. The commitments felt substantial enough to matter, specific enough to be measurable, focused enough on their own development rather than my forgiveness. I sat with them for a moment before responding, trying to calibrate honesty with encouragement, truth with mercy. That's good work. Keep doing it whether I ever fully trust you again or not. Do it because it makes you better people, not because it makes me more comfortable with relationship. The session ended with homework assignments and scheduled next meeting, the usual structure that made therapy feel like collaborative project rather than punishment endured. We walked out separately, maintaining boundaries that felt necessary even as relationships slowly shifted towards something that might eventually become healthy. The confirmation hearing arrived with the particular tension that comes from high-stakes evaluation, my entire professional life compressed into 6 hours of questioning, from senators who wanted to understand my judicial philosophy and political leanings, and whether I would be predictable vote for preferred outcomes or independent thinker whose reasoning transcended partisan preference. I answered questions about constitutional interpretation and statutory construction, about federalism and individual rights, about cases I had decided and reasoning I had applied, and how I would approach appellate review differently than trial court decision-making. The questions were sharp and searching, designed to expose inconsistency or reveal ideology disguised as neutral principle. Senator Mitchell from Texas pressed on the Morrison case, the opinion Daniel had praised and my family had never read. Your ruling in Morrison versus State expanded whistleblower protections significantly. Some critics argue you prioritize policy preference over textual fidelity. How do you respond? I responded by carefully explaining how statutory text about public interest required interpretation, informed by constitutional values, how whistleblower protections served governmental accountability that was essential to democratic function, how my reasoning was textualist without being rigid and purposive without being result-oriented. The answer felt honest and defensible, the kind of constitutional reasoning that could be challenged but not easily dismissed as partisan or unprincipled. Senator Williams from California asked about judicial temperament and professional relationships, her questions probing whether I could work collegially with judges whose philosophies differed from mine. I cited examples of cases where I had joined opinions I disagreed with because precedent required it, situations where I had written respectful dissents that engaged opposing reasoning rather than dismissing it, relationships with colleagues across ideological spectrum who valued rigor over agreement. The questioning continued through afternoon, senators cycling through topics that ranged from technical legal doctrine to broad constitutional philosophy. I maintained composure that felt genuine rather than performed, answering with clarity that came from actually believing my reasoning instead of calculating politically advantageous responses. The final question came from Senator Rodriguez from New Mexico, her tone gentler than the interrogation that had preceded it. Judge Whitfield, you've served with distinction on the district bench for 11 years. What do you hope to contribute to the Ninth Circuit if confirmed? The answer required honesty about ambition balanced with humility about role, acknowledgement of what appellate service meant without presuming confirmation was guaranteed. I spoke about developing constitutional doctrine through careful reasoning, about training law clerks who would become next generation of lawyers and judges, about writing opinions that would be clear enough for practitioners to apply, and rigorous enough for scholars to engage seriously. But mostly, I concluded, meeting her eyes directly, I hope to contribute the same thing I've tried to contribute at district level: honest engagement with hard questions, respect for people who disagree with my reasoning, and commitment to law as discipline that transcends individual preference or political convenience. The hearing ended with the committee chair thanking me for my testimony and promising vote within 2 weeks. I walked out of the Senate building into February cold that felt cleansing after hours under fluorescent lights, Daniel waiting outside with the patient support that characterized his entire approach to relationship. You were brilliant. He fell into step beside me, his hand finding mine with casual intimacy that no longer felt new, but had settled into comfortable familiarity. Clear and principled and completely honest about your reasoning. If they don't confirm you, it's politics, not qualification. The vote came 3 weeks later, 53 to 47, closer than I would have preferred but sufficient for confirmation. Some senators praised my judicial record and constitutional reasoning. Others raised concerns about opinions they characterized as activist or overly expansive in protecting individual rights against government authority. The division fell largely along party lines with enough crossover to suggest genuine evaluation of qualifications alongside political calculation. I was sworn into the Ninth Circuit on March 15, 2025, my hand on the same borrowed Bible I had used for district court oath 12 years earlier, my voice steady with promise to uphold Constitution and administer justice without respect to persons. My mother attended, sitting quietly in the back row without seeking recognition or requiring emotional labor. Vivienne came with Marcus, both of them dressed simply and maintaining respectful distance that suggested they understood this achievement belonged to me without needing their participation to make it meaningful. Daniel sat in the front row with Judge Thomas Chen and several colleagues from the district bench. His presence the kind of support that required nothing from me except willingness to be seen succeeding by someone who genuinely celebrated my achievement. The ceremony felt different than district court swearing in had 12 years ago, not because the oath had changed, but because I had changed. No longer invisible to family, and no longer needing their visibility to validate my worth. The reception afterward brought together legal community and personal relationships, colleagues who respected my work and family who were learning to see me clearly. I moved through conversations that felt genuine rather than performed, accepting congratulations that were offered without agenda or expectation. Judge Chen pulled me aside during the reception, his expression carrying the particular warmth that comes from watching someone you help succeed achieve the elevation they deserved. Your father would have been proud, not because you're a federal appeals judge, but because you did the work with integrity and let the results speak for themselves. The comment landed with unexpected weight, invoking parent who had known me imperfectly but trusted me substantially, who had given me majority share of his estate because he understood which daughter would steward it responsibly. I felt tears threaten for the first time that day, not from sadness, but from recognition that some people see clearly even when they can't articulate what they see. Thank you for everything, for remembering me when my family forgot, for speaking truth when silence would have been easier, for understanding that being seen mattered even when I pretended it didn't. You earned every bit of this recognition through work that was excellent, whether anyone noticed or not. He spoke with quiet conviction, judge delivering verdict based on evidence. But I'm glad people are noticing now. You deserve to be seen. The party ended late, guests departing with congratulations and promises to see me at upcoming oral arguments. I stood in the emptying room with Daniel, both of us tired in the satisfied way that comes after events that matter, achievement that feels earned rather than awarded. Ready to go home? His question carried weight beyond simple logistics, acknowledgement that we had been building towards shared space and shared future, relationship that felt substantial enough to support next steps. My place or yours? Ours, he smiled, the expression warm with implication I was ready to accept. I found a house in Marin, bay views, garden space, room for home office and law library. I put an offer in contingent on your approval. If you hate it, we'll keep looking. If you love it, we'll move in together and figure out the rest as we go. The proposal arrived casual but considered, offering partnership without pressure, commitment without demanding I sacrifice independence or professional focus. I looked at this man who understood my work and respected my boundaries, who had supported my confirmation without making it about his needs, who offered relationship that felt like enhancement rather than requirement. Show me the house. We drove to Marin in the darkness, crossing the Golden Gate Bridge with the bay spreading dark beneath us and the city lights receding behind. The house sat on a hillside overlooking water, mid-century modern with walls of windows and clean lines that suggested both comfort and sophistication. Inside, it smelled like potential and new beginnings, empty rooms waiting for furniture and books, and the accumulated evidence of life lived intentionally. I walked through rooms imagining my belongings mixed with his, my judicial robes hanging beside his academic regalia, our separate collections of law books merged into shared library that would serve both our work. The space felt right in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Domestic partnership that wouldn't require me to diminish professionally or perform personally. I love it. The admission came easy, honesty without hedging. Let's make an offer. Already did. Contingent on your approval, which you just gave. We close in 60 days. The presumption would have felt aggressive from anyone else, but from Daniel felt like confidence earned through months of demonstrating he understood what I needed and could provide it without requiring me to ask. We stood in the empty living room looking out at water dark under stars, two people building something together, without requiring either person to be smaller or different or more convenient for the other's comfort. April brought oral arguments and written opinions, the particular rhythm of appellate work that differed from trial court routine. I sat on 3 judge panels hearing cases about environmental regulation and criminal sentencing, about statutory interpretation, and constitutional limits on government authority. The work felt familiar and elevated simultaneously. Same legal reasoning applied at higher level of abstraction, with broader implications for precedent and doctrine. My first opinion for the court arrived in early May. A case about administrative procedure that required careful balance between deference to agency expertise and judicial review of potential overreach. I wrote with the same clarity I had brought to district court opinions, explaining reasoning step by step so attorneys could understand how to comply, and other judges could engage with analysis rather than just announce agreement or disagreement. Daniel read the opinion the night before publication, His editorial suggestions minimal because he respected my voice while occasionally catching logical gaps I had missed. We worked at the dining table in our new house, his constitutional law scholarship beside my judicial opinions. Both of us focused on work that mattered while existing comfortably in shared space. "This is good work." He set down the draft, his expression carrying genuine professional respect, clear reasoning, careful balance between competing values. Exactly the kind of opinion that builds doctrine incrementally, instead of trying to resolve everything in single ruling. "You disagree with the outcome." I heard it in his tone, the scholar's recognition of sound reasoning that led to conclusion he would have avoided if deciding the case himself. "I do, but that doesn't make your reasoning wrong. It makes it different from mine." That's what pluralism looks like in practice. The exchange felt characteristic of what we had built together, relationship where disagreement didn't require either person to be wrong, where respect could coexist with different conclusions, where challenge sharpened thinking instead of threatening connection. Family therapy continued through spring and summer, sessions that felt increasingly productive as my mother and sister did genuine work instead of performing contrition. Patricia had downsized to an apartment in Berkeley, close enough to stay connected, but far enough to establish independent life that didn't center on managing daughters. She volunteered 30 hours weekly at Literacy Center, taught adults to read with patience. She had never quite extended to her own children's emotional needs. Vivienne's transformation felt more dramatic because her starting point had been more performative. The distance between curated Instagram life and honest existence wider than she had realized before everything collapsed. She had been promoted to senior designer at the firm where she worked, earned raises based on actual skill rather than aesthetic presentation, built client base that valued her professional judgment instead of her social media following. The July therapy session fell on the 1-year anniversary of the engagement party, the date marking both catastrophic revelation and necessary reckoning. Dr. Santos acknowledged the milestone with characteristic directness, her question forcing all of us to evaluate progress against starting point. "1 year ago this week, your family dynamic exploded publicly. Diana was revealed as federal judge, financial theft was exposed, engagement was ended, and everyone's understanding of reality shifted dramatically. Where are you now compared to where you were then?" My mother answered first, her voice carrying less trembling than it had in earlier sessions. "I'm alone and financially diminished, and finally learning who I am without performing the society matron who raised perfect daughters. It's hard and sometimes lonely, but it's honest in ways my previous life never was." Vivienne spoke next, her answer measured and thoughtful. "I'm married to someone who knows me instead of my performance, working at a job that values my skills instead of my appearance, learning that respect is better than admiration and substance outlasts attention." My turn arrived with the weight of years' accumulation, transformation that had been forced rather than chosen, but had led to elevation I hadn't anticipated. I'm a federal appeals judge living with partner who respects my work, managing family estate that generates meaningful revenue, maintaining boundaries with family members who are finally learning to see me clearly. I don't know if I'm happier than I was when I was invisible, but I'm more whole. Dr. Santos pushed toward the question we had been circling without quite addressing directly. "Diana, can you forgive your mother and sister? Not today necessarily, but eventually, can you imagine a relationship that isn't defined primarily by betrayal and recovery?" The question forced articulation of forgiveness's relationship to healing, whether one required the other, or if they could exist separately. I considered carefully before answering, trying for honesty that acknowledged complexity without demanding resolution I couldn't yet provide. I don't know if I can forgive in the sense of absolving what happened or restoring trust completely, but I can release the anger that was burning me from inside. I can acknowledge they're doing hard work to become better people. I can maintain relationship that's boundaried but genuine, conditional but present. Maybe that's close enough to forgiveness to allow healing, even if it's not reconciliation in the fairy tale sense. That's wise. Dr. Santos nodded approval. Forgiveness doesn't require restoration of previous relationship. It requires release of anger that's hurting you more than them. And it sounds like you're doing that work while maintaining boundaries that protect your well-being. That's exactly what healthy forgiveness looks like. The session ended with the understanding that we would continue therapy but reduce frequency from monthly to quarterly, progression that suggested we had built foundation that could support ongoing relationship without constant professional mediation. August brought the conversation I had been anticipating since spring. The discussion that would either deepen relationship with Daniel into permanent commitment or clarify that what we had built was substantial but insufficient for marriage. We sat on our deck overlooking the bay, summer evening warm and clear, both of us holding wine glasses neither of us was drinking. "I want to marry you." He spoke without preamble, his tone carrying conviction without pressure. "Not because we need legal recognition, or because I'm insecure about commitment. Because I want to stand up publicly and say you're the person I choose and who chooses me. That we're building something together that's permanent and witnessed and celebrated." The proposal arrived without ring or performance, just honest statement from partner who had demonstrated through actions that words would be backed by consistent behavior. I looked at this man who had supported my confirmation without making it about himself, who had challenged my thinking without requiring me to agree with him, who had offered partnership that enhanced rather than limited my professional life. Yes, the answer felt inevitable and right, acceptance of future that would include shared decisions and mutual support and all the complicated work of building life together. I want that too, with you specifically. Not marriage in abstract, but this relationship formalized and witnessed and acknowledged. No elaborate wedding. He smiled, reading my preference accurately. Justice of the peace, small gathering, dinner after with people who actually matter to us. Then honeymoon somewhere beautiful where we can disconnect and just be together. Perfect. I leaned into him, feeling the particular peace that comes from making decision that aligns head and heart, choice that feels both pragmatic and romantic in appropriate balance. We married in October. Small ceremony at the Marin House with 20 guests who represented our actual lives, rather than social obligations. Judge Chen officiated, performing ceremony with the dignified warmth that characterized everything he did. My mother attended with genuine joy that seemed unperformed. Vivienne, with Marcus beside her, looking happy in ways that suggested they had rebuilt something real beneath initial attraction. Daniel's adult children came from the East Coast, his daughter a public defender in Boston, and his son an environmental lawyer in D.C., both of them kind and welcoming in ways that suggested their father had raised them to value substance over surface. They called me by my first name instead of my title, treated me like person rather than position, offered relationship without demanding I perform stepmother role neither they nor I needed. The reception felt casual and genuine, good food and honest conversation. People who knew us well enough to celebrate who we actually were instead of who we performed being. I looked around at the gathering and realized this was chosen family, people who saw me clearly and liked what they saw. Relationships built on mutual respect instead of obligation or assumption. We honeymooned in Oregon wine country, 2 weeks away from judicial opinions and constitutional scholarship. Time spent hiking and tasting wine and existing together without agenda, beyond enjoying each other's company. The quiet felt restorative in ways I hadn't realized I needed. Space to just be without performing or producing or proving anything to anyone. 18 months after the engagement party that had shattered my family's illusions, life had reconstructed itself into something better than what had broken. March 2026 brought my 48th birthday, and with it the particular satisfaction of inhabiting life I had chosen, rather than role I had been assigned. I sat in my Ninth Circuit chambers, reviewing briefs for upcoming oral arguments. The work challenging and meaningful in ways that justified every sacrifice and silent year that had preceded elevation. My law clerk knocked hesitantly, young woman fresh from Yale Law who had requested my chambers specifically because she had read my opinions and wanted to learn from judge whose reasoning she admired. "Judge Whitfield? Do you have a moment?" "Come in, Rebecca." I set down the brief, giving her my full attention in ways I tried to model from judges who had mentored me. She entered carrying the particular nervousness that characterized young lawyers, navigating professional spaces, where they felt uncertain of their standing. "I have a question that's maybe too personal. You can tell me if it is." "Ask. Worst case, I'll tell you it's too personal and we'll move on. My family doesn't understand why I wanted to clerk instead of going straight to big law firm." She spoke quickly, words tumbling with urgency of question long suppressed. They think I'm wasting my potential by working for modest salary with uncertain future, instead of accepting market rate and clear partnership track. How do you know when you're making right choice, even when people who love you think you're making wrong one? The question landed with the weight of familiar pain. Young woman navigating exactly the dismissal I had spent decades internalizing before finally refusing to accept it. I considered my answer carefully, trying for wisdom that would be useful without requiring her to mirror my specific journey. Tell me about your family. What do they value? Success that looks impressive from outside. My dad's a surgeon, my mom's a corporate lawyer, my older sister is in finance. They measure achievement by salary and status, and whether other people are impressed when you say what you do. And what do you value? Work that matters. She spoke with conviction that suggested she had examined this question thoroughly. Work where I'm learning from excellent people and contributing to outcomes that affect real lives. Clerking for you means spending a year understanding constitutional reasoning and appellate decision-making at highest level. That's worth more to my development than any salary. Then you know your answer. I spoke gently but firmly, sharing truth I had learned too late and too painfully. You don't build your career to prove your family wrong. You build it because you deserve to live in full color, whether they ever see it or not. Their approval might come eventually when the work speaks for itself. It might never come. Either way, you'll have built something that matters on its own terms. Did your family ever understand what you do? Eventually. After dramatic revelation forced them to see what I had been trying to tell them for years. She looked curious, so I continued, deciding this story might be useful in ways I hadn't anticipated. I spent 11 years as district judge with family who thought I was county clerk. Took public confrontation at my sister's engagement party for them to understand I had been federal judge the entire time. Her eyes widened with recognition and something approaching awe. "You're Judge Whitfield from the engagement party story? That's you?" The question surprised me until I remembered that legal gossip travels efficiently through clerk networks and young lawyers who follow judicial careers. Apparently, my family's public unraveling had become cautionary tale or inspirational narrative depending on perspective. That's me. Everyone talks about how you handled it, how you just stood there and spoke truth clearly without defending yourself or apologizing. Like you knew your work spoke for itself and their opinion didn't change the facts. The characterization felt more generous than my actual experience had been. Retrospective interpretation that smoothed over the genuine pain and confusion of that September night. But it was useful story for this young woman who needed permission to value her own judgment over family expectation. Here's what I learned that I wish I'd understood sooner. I leaned forward, trying to convey importance without melodrama. Family who loves you will eventually see clearly if you give them accurate information and time to process it. Family who needs you to be certain thing to validate their worldview will resist seeing you clearly no matter how much evidence you provide. Either way, you build the life that matters to you, and you let their response be their responsibility instead of your burden. How do you know which kind of family you have? You tell them clearly what you're doing and why it matters, and you watch their response. If they listen and try to understand even when they don't agree, that's family working towards seeing clearly. If they dismiss or minimize or keep explaining why you're wrong without engaging your actual reasoning, that's family protecting their worldview instead of knowing their daughter. And if it's the second kind, then you love them if you can, you maintain boundaries that protect you, and you build chosen family with people who see you clearly and celebrate what they see. Blood doesn't obligate you to accept dismissal or perform smaller to make others comfortable. She absorbed this in thoughtful silence, the kind that suggested she was considering application rather than just acknowledging receipt. Thank you. That helps more than you probably realize. After she left, I sat in my chambers looking out at San Francisco Bay, the water bright under spring sun, and the city spreading toward hills in the distance. My phone buzzed with text from Daniel, saying he'd be late because faculty meeting ran over. Another text from Vivienne, asking if I wanted to join her and Marcus for dinner next week. Email from my mother sharing articles she thought I'd find interesting about literacy education policy. These small communications from family that had been shattered and reconstructed. Relationships that would never be what they could have been if they had valued me clearly from the beginning, but were becoming something genuine now that pretense had been stripped away. Not reconciliation in fairy tale sense, but honest engagement between people doing hard work to see each other clearly. The vineyard in Sonoma generated its first fully organic harvest in September, Catherine Wells managing the process with expertise that justified every dollar of initial investment. Revenue projections showed we would exceed 1.2 million annually within 3 years, the property finally fulfilling potential my father had recognized 4 decades earlier, when he purchased land that would appreciate, even if no one quite understood how to maximize its value. I drove to Sonoma for harvest celebration, Daniel beside me and Catherine meeting us at the tasting room she had designed to showcase sustainable practices alongside premium wine. The space smelled like oak and fermentation, honest work producing beautiful result through patient cultivation and careful attention to process. Your father would be proud. Catherine poured wine from last year's transition vintage, the quality already showing improvement from previous managers' production. And your management has been exactly what this property needed. Vision without micromanagement, investment without interference, trust backed by accountability. The compliment landed as professional acknowledgement rather than personal flattery. Expert recognizing competent stewardship when she saw it. I accepted the wine and the praise with equal measure, understanding that both were earned rather than awarded, the result of good decisions consistently applied over time. That evening, we sat on the hill overlooking vineyard rows heavy with grapes waiting for harvest. The particular satisfaction of seeing potential actualized through sustained effort and intelligent management. I thought about my father who had bought this land and trusted me with majority share, about my mother who had betrayed that trust and was now learning to rebuild different relationship, about the sister who had benefited from theft and was now choosing independence over subsidized performance. The weight of family had been crushing when it required me to stay small so others could feel big. The lightness of family rebuilding on honest foundation felt like possibility rather than obligation, chosen connection instead of compelled performance. It's been almost 2 years. Daniel's observation arrived quiet, but weighted with recognition of anniversary I had been aware of without quite marking. 2 years since the engagement party. How does it feel looking back? Like destruction that made room for construction. Like losing family I thought I had and discovering family I could actually build. Like being seen violently but necessarily. Revelation that hurt but healed better than continued invisibility ever would. Any regrets? Only that it took so long. That I spent 46 years invisible because it felt safer than demanding to be seen. That I enabled their dismissal by accepting it instead of challenging it earlier. You weren't enabling, you were surviving. He took my hand, his voice carrying conviction earned through understanding rather than assumption. You did what you needed to do to build career that mattered while managing family that couldn't see you clearly. Once you had foundation secure enough to withstand their reaction, the truth emerged. That's strategy, not failure. The reframe landed with the particular relief that comes from having pain acknowledged without requiring me to justify my choices or defend my timeline. I leaned into him, letting silence settle comfortable between us. Two people who had built something genuine out of wreckage and patience and willingness to be seen fully. We drove back to Marin as sunset over the Pacific, the water turning colors that looked expensive even though nature provided them free. The house waited with lights Daniel had left on for our return, walls of windows glowing warm against darkness, space we had filled with books and furniture, and accumulated evidence of life lived intentionally. Inside, I found letter from Patricia, handwritten envelope addressed with the particular care that suggested importance. I opened it while Daniel made tea, both of us settling into evening routine that had become comfortable pattern. The letter began without preamble. My mother's script precise and controlled in ways her emotional management had never quite been. Diana, I've written this letter 17 times, trying to find words that acknowledge what I did, without making it about asking you to comfort me through my guilt. Dr. Santos says that's progress. I spent 68 years believing my job as mother was creating daughters who made me look successful. I measured my parenting by external validation, rather than your actual flourishing. I funded Vivienne's lifestyle with your inheritance, because supporting visible success felt like my responsibility, and you seemed fine without me. I was wrong about everything. about what good parenting looks like, about what you needed, about whether competence exempts someone from deserving celebration. I stole from you financially, and I stole from you emotionally by requiring you to be foundation. Everyone stood on without ever acknowledging the weight you carried. I can't fix what I broke. I can't give back the years you spent invisible or the professional advancement my words cost you. I can only do the work to become someone whose relationship might eventually be worth maintaining, and let you decide whether that's sufficient. I'm proud of you. Not because you're federal appeals judge, though that's extraordinary, because you built life that mattered through competence and integrity and refusal to compromise your values for anyone's approval. You succeeded despite me, not because of me. That's simultaneously my biggest regret and my greatest relief. Thank you for not destroying me when you had every right and ability to do so. Thank you for allowing relationship to rebuild on honest foundation. Thank you for being exactly who you are, even when I couldn't see clearly enough to appreciate it. I love you. I'm sorry. I'm trying to become someone worthy of being loved back. The letter ended with just her signature, no request for response or reassurance, no demands for absolution or restoration, just honest acknowledgement of what had been broken, and commitment to doing work whether I ever forgave her or not. I read it twice before handing it to Daniel, watching his expression as he absorbed words my mother had needed 17 attempts to write clearly. He set it down gently when finished, his hand finding mine with understanding that required no verbal expression. What will you do? Write back. Tell her I received it and appreciated the honesty. Tell her I'm not ready for full reconciliation, but I'm willing to continue building toward relationship that's boundaried but genuine. Give her what she needs to keep doing the work without requiring her to earn my forgiveness through performance. That's generous. That's strategic. I want her to become a better person for her own sake, not for mine. The best way to support that is removing myself as the goal she needs to reach and letting her growth be sufficient motivation, independent of whether I ever trust her completely. The wisdom arrived hard-won, understanding that forgiveness and reconciliation could be separated, that mercy didn't require restoration of previous relationship, that healing could occur in parallel without requiring convergence. My mother could become a better person, and I could maintain boundaries, and both things could be true simultaneously without contradiction. March became April became May, the rhythm of judicial work and domestic partnership creating life that felt substantial and sustainable. I wrote opinions that would shape constitutional doctrine, taught clerks who would become next generation of lawyers and judges, managed vineyard that generated meaningful revenue, maintained relationship with husband who respected my work and family, who were learning to see me clearly. The life I had built looked nothing like the life my family had imagined for me when I was 12 years old, winning academic competitions they barely acknowledged. It looked exactly like the life I had chosen when I decided that being seen accurately mattered more than being comfortable invisibly. 2 years and 8 months after the engagement party that shattered my family's illusions, I stood in my chambers late on Friday afternoon, reviewing the week's work and preparing for the weekend ahead. The sun slanted through windows overlooking the bay, the water bright under spring light, and the city spreading toward hills that probably looked the same as they had when I first arrived as young prosecutor decades ago. My reflection in the dark glass showed woman I had finally allowed myself to become. 48 years old, federal appeals judge, married to partner who enhanced rather than limited my professional life, managing family estate that generated substantial revenue, maintaining boundaried relationship with family members who were learning to see me clearly for the first time. The image stayed with me as I gathered my briefcase and locked my chambers, as I walked through the federal building toward the parking garage, as I drove north across the Golden Gate Bridge toward home, where Daniel would be cooking dinner, and the weekend would unfold with the comfortable predictability of life lived intentionally. Being unseen had protected me for decades, allowed me to build career and accumulate wealth and develop competence without the burden of family opinion or social expectation. But being seen, I had learned, being truly seen and acknowledged despite every instinct toward protective invisibility, was the only way to be fully alive. The cost of visibility had been high, family relationships shattered and rebuilt differently, Professional advancement delayed by years because people who should have championed me instead undermined. Financial theft that required legal remedy, and fractured trust that would never fully heal. But the return on visibility was higher still. Career elevated to position where I could shape constitutional doctrine. Partnership with someone who saw me clearly and loved what he saw. Financial independence that freed me from needing anyone's approval or support. Family relationships reconstructed on foundation of honesty instead of performance. I had spent 46 years learning to speak through silence, to matter without being noticed, to build excellence that existed whether anyone acknowledged it or not. And then truth had arrived forced rather than chosen. Revelation that had shattered comfortable illusions and left me standing visible whether I wanted to be or not. The visibility had been violent in its suddenness and necessary in its completeness. It had destroyed family dynamic that had never been healthy and cleared space for relationships that might eventually become genuine. It had cost me comfort and given me back myself. Driving home through spring evening that smelled like eucalyptus and ocean, I thought about young law clerk asking how to know when you're making right choice, even when people who love you think you're wrong. I thought about the answer I had given her and the answer I had lived. You build the life that matters to you, and you let their response be their responsibility instead of your burden. The house appeared on the hillside ahead, lights glowing warm against gathering darkness. Daniel visible through windows preparing dinner and kitchen we shared. Home built with someone who saw me clearly. Work that shaped law and taught clerks and contributed to constitutional development that mattered. Family that was learning to see me accurately even if they couldn't quite understand everything they saw. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment before going inside, breathing air that tasted like freedom and new beginnings. Looking at life I had built through competence and integrity and refusal to stay small for anyone's comfort. The foundation was solid beneath me now, visible to everyone including myself, acknowledged and celebrated and impossible to ignore. Silence, I had learned, is not absence. Silence is choice. And sometimes the most powerful choice is deciding when silence ends and truth begins, even if the beginning comes harder and later and more painfully than anyone wanted. But once truth begins, I had discovered, once you stop protecting people from reality they need to see, once you allow yourself to be visible despite every instinct towards safe invisibility, the life that emerges is richer and fuller and more honest than anything you could have built while hiding. I gathered my briefcase and walked toward the house, toward the life waiting inside, toward the future unfolding with every choice I made to be seen clearly instead of invisible comfortably. The door opened before I reached it, Daniel silhouetted against warm light, his smile welcoming me home to the life we were building together. And for the first time in memory, I felt no need to make myself smaller to fit through the doorway. I could walk in full-sized, fully seen, fully myself. The visibility still felt uncomfortable sometimes, still required conscious choice instead of natural instinct, but it was the only way to be alive, and I was done choosing anything less.